Well, yeah, I when I started, I had no idea like what I was doing.
We welcome Mr. Indigo Game on our Voxel Smash space, and he's a YouTube documentarian and also a Daggerfall apologist, but I'm sure we can all forgive him for that. Maybe sometime in the future.
Never.
But yeah, he does a lot of videos on old games, new games as well, on game design. So I thought it was really interesting to talk a bit with him about his work and the games he likes or doesn't like as well. And but yeah, first thing I wanted to start us off with is your journey as a content creator, so to speak. Um,
Sure.
you started. I mean, your oldest video on YouTube, at least, is from 7 years ago. So I don't know if you started earlier than that, but yeah, I've seen across these 7 years that you've of course evolved and changed your style a bit, but more or less, I think you stayed on the same style of documentaries about games. It's more or less, I think, what you want to do. So, how how has your journey changed over these years? What did you learn? Where did you start from, and where are you now?
Well, yeah, I when I started, I had no idea like what I was doing. Really, I mean, this is my first YouTube channel. I had another personal YouTube channel that I was working on
Mm.
some solo game dev and things, music and stuff like that. But this is my first like gaming channel, and I just started on a whim. I was at work one day, and I was like, "Oh man, I'm really not happy right now," and I just wanted to just kind of have a place to vent, or a place to just to kind of create something that I can approve, that I just put up and it's done. As I'm sure you probably can relate at some point in some way. Basically, if you ever work for other people, there's just a lot of red tape. There's a lot of approvals. There's a lot of rejections. There's a lot of edit this. Oh, we'll hear back in a couple months. Maybe. Oh, we'd end up using it. And it's just as any sort of content creator, whether you're writing articles or designing, logos or graphics or videos or whatever, it just kind of eats at you for after a while. You just feel like you just have so much blockage to creating. So I just wanted to have a place where I could just put something up and maybe somebody'd see it, maybe somebody would like it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the final say. So I just booted up I think I had just the NVIDIA broadcast or something like that. And I had a cheap, horrible microphone, like a $10 microphone attached to my ear. I was recording at 30 FPS. I was playing at 60, but I was recording at 30. My audio levels, like you could barely hear me over the gameplay. Like everything was wrong. I made
Classic,
every single mistake you could
the
possibly
classic
make.
mistake.
Right? Edited it in I think Sony Movie Studio, which is like a $30 program, and put it online. And a couple of friends and family saw it, and a couple of people said like, "Hey, this is a game, whatever." But it wasn't anything crazy. But I had fun. I played something. I was able to talk and just explain things and stuff like that. I immediately upgraded, you know, adjusted my sound levels and upgraded and basically just let's plays. I did a couple let's plays at first.
Mm-hmm.
I never got much traction, like maybe like 30, 50 views at most. And it wasn't until I think this is right around 2016. I did start my channel in May 2016, and then I think Doom 2016 just come out, and that was it. People kind of have an altered view of it now, but when that game was about to come out, people were very skeptical. People did not know if it was going to be good or not,
True.
and and even with I think if you remember, the embargo was like the noon of the day
Hmm.
it came out or something like that. It was a very weird embargo, which made you think that, oh man, they're hiding something, but it ended up being great. Everybody loved it. So I was really happy with it. And so I did like a little, at that time, it was a huge project. It was like a 10-minute video about Doom and the history of Doom, whatever. And that's like the oldest video that I still have public on my channel. A lot of my other videos, I did like some Overwatch guides and things like that. They weren't very good, but that was probably my oldest scripted video that I still have live on my channel. I've unlisted a couple other things, but that was kind of like I felt like I was actually creating something interesting and cool and different. I'm like, wow, I created a Doom retrospective, 10 minutes long. Wow, that's crazy, right? And then I published it, and it got like 100, maybe 100 views. I don't know. It got a few,
Hmm.
And then I made the mistake of going on YouTube and searching for Doom retrospective,
Mm-hmm.
and guess what my top result was?
Who was it?
An hour-long video by Xbox Ahoy. That's the best like Doom retrospective you could ever make.
Yeah.
And so that actually almost made me quit YouTube because I realized I would never be able to do anything close to that. And so I'm like, why am I still here just to suffer kind of thing, right? So I so but I stuck to it, and then I figured like, okay, well, this is kind of eye-opening. I did something which I thought was really good, but wasn't nearly as good or comprehensive as somebody else. So that actually was probably a really important point for me because I realized I should do something that nobody else has done.
Hmm.
And so I saw a couple videos about Looking Glass Studios, one of my favorite, classic devs, but nobody had really done like a comprehensive retrospective on Looking Glass. So that's when I started doing. I wrote a script for like a 30-minute video, but it was so quote unquote so long that I broke it up into three videos.
Mm-hmm.
And I was still learning a lot. I was still learning a lot about editing. I was still learning a lot about sound mixing and stuff. But that was probably my first like big project was doing the three-part Looking Glass Studios project. And I could have done more research. There was people that called me out and said that I got this wrong or that wrong. So still learning. But I got a nod. I think I got retweeted by Other Side Entertainment, and like
Hmm.
got some. I think it was somebody posted my stuff on the System Shock forums and things like that. So I was like, okay, cool. This is kind of like what being a content creator is like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I kind of went on and on, and then at some point, I made some cyberpunk reviews, various games, little one-off things. But at that time, I was basically pumping out a video every week or two.
Hmm.
And then it wasn't until I decided to make a Diablo video that I first saw like my first taste of success, which was, at that time a fairly long video. I think it was like 15 minutes, 20 minutes or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like 100,000 views. I'm like, wow, this can actually happen sometimes. And from there, I kind of got into the I'm going to do kind of niche retrospective reviews slash and then at some point, yeah, between the Diablo video and my Daggerfall video, I realized that I could just kind of approach whatever topic kind of interested me, but I always try to find a niche that nobody else had really done yet. So that's kind of that's the kind of evolution of my channel, and I'm doing variations of that since, but we can get into that later.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting that you mention finding a niche because the feeling that I'm getting lately when I get recommended documentaries on YouTube or try to find something is that it has become very difficult to find something that it hasn't someone hasn't already done a video on. Of course, I mean it might be a bad video, it might be like a 10-minute video, 15-minute video. Of course, you gotta pump up those numbers. So one can always dive in deeper, but I feel I don't know maybe, but lately that a lot of people are jumping onto the documentaries like train, so to speak, and like for
Yeah.
example, I've gotten a lot of views. For example, my articles on Dead of the Brain suddenly, like a couple weeks ago,
Hmm.
and I was like, "What's going on?" I mean, I mean that article has always had a lot of views, but I mean a lot of views, okay, compared to other stuff, yes. But suddenly it was like double that. So I was like, wait, what's going on? Of course, I found out that
Interesting.
someone had actually done a YouTube video on it, and apparently it has been successful, even though it's a basically unknown Japanese game that got a very limited release on the PC Engine outside of Japan. So definitely very obscure. It's definitely that's a definition of a niche. But yeah, so it is interesting that a lot of people are finding obscure games and still doing like 30-40 minutes videos on it. So how do you feel about that? Do you feel that also a lot of people are more jumping on the kind of finding a niche game and doing a 30-minute video on it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Some people, it's almost their brand. Like if you watch Mandalore Gaming, he like loves to dig up some similar with Ross's Game Dungeon. They like to dig up like an obscure game from the 90s and then just like
Yep.
do a huge deep dive. But the problem with that is that that game has no traction in itself. So unless you get discovered somehow, or unless you already have an established brand and following, it's very difficult to get eyes on that. With Mandalore does incredibly well. So does Russ's game
Yep.
engine. So they already have that sort of build up. They've got their Patreon. They've got their niche, and like usually within a day, both of them have like 200, 300,000 views, regardless of what they cover for the most part.
Yep.
So they can kind of do that, but it is definitely more risky as a smaller creator or who doesn't have that following, because you do not have any organic searching for that term. So it's really cool that you're able to kind of receive some kind of indirect traffic from that particular game getting some notoriety. But it is definitely tougher to start with that. The way I've tried to avoid the way I've tried to essentially circumvent that is because uh, as much of a subscriber count that I have, it doesn't necessarily guarantee any video is going to do well.
Yep.
I try to find a way to piggyback a topic on something else. It's
Mm.
not clickbait, but basically, like, great example is my Dark Earth video. I don't think anybody had done it. I couldn't find a video review of that game anywhere,
Mm-mm.
and I actually tracked down the creative director of that and did an interview with him. And I was like, wow, this could be a really cool topic. That was supposed to be my quick video, but it ended up taking like a couple months to put all that
Yes.
together. But so I was like, wow, this is super cool, because a lot of the stuff on Wikipedia was wrong.
Mm.
I could actually kind of shine a light on this kind of obscure game that I played when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but you notice that the choice of words I used for that video are very deliberate. I think I said Fallout meets Alone in the Dark or something like that.
Yep.
So I knew that those terms might help put eyes on this thing that people weren't really searching for.
Yep.
So that's kind of what I've been doing in the past. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. With Dark Earth, it worked fine.
Yeah, that's actually how I found you. That was 3 years ago, maybe. Yeah, that definitely.
That
So
sounds about right, I think. Yeah, maybe
yeah,
3 or 4.
yeah. The video is from 5 years ago. So yeah, it was not long after I've been released, because I was also searching for people who had already talked or done a video on Dark Earth, and there was nothing. So your video like popped up, and I was like, so someone did play it, Dark Earth.
Yeah, it's funny though. You probably can relate too. Like when you bought these games at the store, you had no idea. Like I had no idea that System Shock 2 was a failure, like a massive failure. I thought it was one of the most popular games of the year. It wasn't until later that I found out that nobody bought the game. I'm like, wow, I kind of feel special because I bought it. I bought it at the store brand new. But same thing with Dark Earth. Like I was pretty hyped for that game for a good year or so before it came out, from magazine interviews and stuff like that. But I didn't know that it was a fairly. It didn't do terribly from what I know, but
Mm.
it wasn't. It wasn't. Now it's pretty obscure.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, and again, they did try, because I know in the US it got a fairly standard cover art, but in Europe, in a couple of countries, including Italy, of course, it got kind of very provocative cover art. I
Oh,
don't know
the
if,
boob lady, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, the
I
boob
call it
lady.
the zombie boob lady, because she has
Yeah,
these dead eyes, and I don't know if it's, I mean, I find it more disquieting than sexy, but yeah, to each his own. No king shaming.
yeah. Guillaume Lepeneco wasn't super happy with the cinematics. I thought the cinematics in that game were pretty cool, but yeah,
Yeah.
the quote unquote sexy dance girl, he wasn't very happy with how that turned out, and that was, I think, a different studio or a different team that did the cinematics, and he wasn't super happy with the way it turned out. And yeah, even the honestly, even the American box art has like the concha light on the cover, and it was kind of it was definitely intriguing. It
Hmm.
doesn't really communicate what the story is, but it was intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, having a naked dancer that's like maybe like what 10 minutes of gameplay of the actual game. It
Maybe
doesn't really.
that.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of you ever remember that game Forsaken? It was like a mech game or something like that, and they
Yes.
just had basically they hired a model and had her pose naked for all the ads, and it
Yeah, with the
represented
tattoo.
0%. The tattoo, yeah, you remember the ads, yeah. Everybody remembers those ads. Nobody remembers the game, but they remember the
Yes.
ads. So maybe that was enough, but yeah, it was during a time, and I mentioned this a couple times. I've not really done a video about it or anything like that, but I remember there was a time where it seemed like advertising companies were embarrassed at the games they were promoting. The way I say that is like, if you remember the I think PlayStation 1 PC game Death Trap Dungeon. I don't know if you remember those ads, but
Wow, those
they
were.
had like they I think it was like a either centerfold plus like maybe an extra page before, and it was basically the entire ad was just S&M, like a
Yeah,
woman whipping a guy in a
whipping. Yeah.
dungeon. And then if you pull out your magnifying glass and look really closely at the bottom, you might see a couple little tiny screenshots that are about an inch big.
Yes.
And that's how things were like. And I understand from a print designer, if you're working with like a 320 by 240 or like a maybe a 640 by 480 screenshot, and you want to print it 300, DPI, you're gonna not, you don't want to make these little pixelated screenshots big. But what are you selling? You
You
it's
don't
the
know.
screenshots were the smallest part of the actual ads back then.
Hmm.
It almost felt like the advertisers didn't really get or didn't really appreciate what they were trying to sell. They were trying to sell you an image, not the actual gameplay. And I think that was kind of a problem with a lot of games back then. So it really kind of rode on hype and word of mouth. And I guess if the models and the ads made you interested enough to look into the store or whatever. But yeah, it was a very different time. Now they can show you a big old shot of Kratos, killing Zeus or whatever on in God of War. That's the older games, but they can show you a lot more relevant
Hmm.
visuals in advertisements and stuff now, and just straight up video gameplay. So
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is interesting to think back about the classic '90s offensive, so to speak, edgy. I don't know what we want to call them, ads back in the day, because they didn't really seem to be aimed at gamers. I mean, yes, they were aimed at gamers, but then again, a
yeah,
normal gamer would want to know, how does this game look like? If you were
yeah,
spending your your hard-earned cash on it, you wanted to see, how does this game look? Does it look good? Does it look interesting? I mean, I can see like S&M all day, but if I don't know how the game looks like, I'm probably not gonna buy it just on the fact that you're mentioning to me that there's gonna be S&M in the game, which of course there's not gonna be S&M in Death Drop
no, there
Dungeon.
isn't.
um,
There's more S&M in Dungeon Keeper than Death Drop Dungeon.
Definitely, for sure, they missed that. They missed out on that. Yes,
Hmm.
Bullfrog. Shame on you. But yeah, it's yeah, it is interesting because again, it was kind of because you mentioned that, yeah, they were being ashamed of it, so to speak, and so they were almost trying to cater to a different audience, so which was not the core gamer audience. But then again, who are you really talking to? Like non-gamer people who are going to, maybe distractingly see this ad and say, "Wow, is gonna be S&M in the game?" So yeah, it is. Yeah, it is very strange. Also, it is strange to think about going back to Dark Earth, of that, yeah, the zombie boob lady, because even in Italy, which has a tradition of being quite, how can we put it politely, very forgiving, let's say, towards sex, as opposed, especially to the US. Compared,
Liberated, yeah.
yes, yes, as compared to the US, we don't, we don't really, especially we didn't. I don't know about now, but yeah, especially back in the day, back in the '90s, we don't really care about showing, naked ladies to kids. Those were mostly fine in Italy in the '90s. No one really cared. But still, in games, it was still not a thing. So you would not see like ads with boobies or naked lady or scantily clad ladies or anything like that. So going all out with a cover like that, so only doing that in Italy, and I think maybe Poland. I don't know. There's like one other country that has that cover, but most other countries don't have that cover. So UK doesn't have it. France, I think, doesn't have it. It's yeah, it's still kind of. I actually sold my Italian copy, by the way, so to end all this.
I am.
I sold my copy to get
Yeah,
the
I
UK one.
I bought a new copy. I got rid of all my big box games back in the '90s and early 2000s, and I regret that because some of them were
Mm.
I like the original holographic Daggerfall box, and I
Oh,
think Thief and Deus Ex and every all these great games. I don't even know if I have the CDs anymore, but yeah, it's just a lot of space, and I've moved across country a couple times, but yeah, it's interesting how much advertising and marketing and just kind of selling people on a specific fantasy or an idea can really affect the reception of a particular title, regardless of how good the game is or not. Um, but yeah, that was probably one of the down points. Also, I think that if I remember right, that this is years ago, so some of my research is kind of fuzzy, but I believe that there was a publisher issue with Dark Earth specifically. Is that
Mm.
I think they were going to be published by EA, but they backed out or something, and then Microprose was like about to collapse. So like they didn't put much marketing dollars behind the U.S. release, so that probably didn't help. But yeah, it's like they always say sex sells. I mean, you can even see it today. Like as much as people look back, like, oh, that's the dated '90s. We don't do that anymore. Watch your average HBO show and see how well, like how much they push that. You know that every single each HBO show, pretty much, other than maybe I haven't watched the entire thing, so maybe I'm wrong about that. But maybe aside from perhaps what the nuclear meltdown show in the Ukraine. What was that called? The Chernobyl.
Ah,
Other
German.
than like Chernobyl, pretty much every single HBO show has a bunch of nudity and stuff like that in it. And that's basically kind of like their brand. So it's not gone away. It's just people kind of pretend it's not really. Oh, we're above that now. We're above that. We're highbrow now. Video games are highbrow
I
now. We're
mean,
not going to do that
look at
anymore.
Baldur's
But
Gate 3.
look at Baldur's Gate 3, look at all of the the tight fitting clothing and Fortnite and all the costumes and everything like that. It's still there. It's people pretend not to acknowledge it anymore. But what's one thing that I always thought was interesting is that in Europe I noticed that every single region has their own flavor of censorship.
Hmm.
Europe is a lot more liberated in terms of nudity, but America is way more liberated in terms of violence. And that
Yep.
was always an issue. Like, oh, we got to cover these characters up when we port this Japanese or European game to the States. But when they published Fallout 1 or 2, in America, oh yeah, we have everything. You can kill everybody. Who cares, right? But in Germany, they had to like, oh well, you can't kill those NPCs. Can't kill those NPCs. That's too violent. Oh, you're not getting forget it. You're not getting an Australian port. That's just not possible.
No.
So it's just funny how that works. In every region has their own sensibilities.
Yes, which brings to mind I don't know if you heard about it. Actually, someone did a video about it as well. When I wrote about it like a couple years ago at this point, no one had done anything. So I guess someone was inspired, even though they did not credit me at all. So okay, but that's fine. I'm not
Oh,
angry. I'm not angry. Yes, I am angry. Okay. No, the rule of rose case. Don't know if you heard about it.
rule of roads or
Rule of
rose
rose. Rose
rose.
flower. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Basically, this was a
I haven't.
PlayStation 2 survival horror thing that had some kind of, Japanese like children horror theme, which were a little bit, perhaps they could make you think about some kind of fake sexual themes involving children, which is not something you would
Mm,
want in a game published by Sony, especially. But they were just very vague, and when it was distributed in the US by Atlas, actually, no one really seemed to care. So because there wasn't any nudity, so it was just something hinted at about
yeah.
children being abused, and yeah, in the end, in the US, no one bought it, and that was it. So when it came time to port it in Europe, something very interesting happened in that an Italian magazine did a preview of Rule of Rose, a big Italian magazine, slapping in on the cover saying, "In this game, you bury a girl, you bury a very young girl, and you get points for that."
What?
So
Oh,
yes, which of course was not true because it's a survival horror, so you don't get points for burying anyone.
yeah. That reminds me. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I hate that sort of thing where they simplify or just give you a completely wrong impression of the game. Yeah.
So yeah, basically they had plagiarized a review that someone had made of a Japanese copy of this game like a few months before. So basically they took this review and changed it around to make it sound sensationalistic. And you would think, okay, but of course it's bad, but what did it do wrong? I mean, what hurt could it have caused to the game? Yeah, it did a whole mess because Italian politicians picked up on it, and there was this guy that actually went to the European Parliament to ask
Mm,
for the ban of rule of rose in Europe. And the funny thing is that basically the organization that was in charge of looking at the content of the game had already looked at the contents, and so they knew that there was nothing of the sort in the game. So
right.
they,
Nobody had actually played it or
of
read the
course,
original translation
yeah,
or the
obviously.
original language even.
So they told they told the Italian politician, what are you talking about? You're just completely wrong. But by then the damage had already been caused. So basically, rule of rose got banned. I think in 2 3 countries, including the UK, which of course was the biggest market at the time. And it wasn't even banned in Italy in the end, which is funny since
That's pretty ironic.
all the hubbub came from this Italian magazine. And but yeah, so this was how sensitive to the topic of sexual and just sexuality in children we were, that even the US did not care at all about this, did not censor anything. It just released the game as it was, and no one bought it. But yeah, in the Europe, it was just like, oh no, they want to bury the girl alive. So yeah, that indeed.
Yeah, the only reason I actually heard about that game, I think, was the Tangomushi video. Is that the one that you're talking about?
Uh,
Tangomushi?
I think so, yes. But if
Yeah.
it's a recent video, yes, I'm definitely talking about that one.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest one. But yeah, she does a lot of survival horror stuff. Yeah, always, just as a side, I always try to credit any video, any videos, any articles, and everything like that. Sometimes I often go over the maximum character count in my video description, and I have to create a Google Doc to link to show all my sources and citations and stuff like that. I don't know if many people read that, but I always try to give credit where credit's due, because I know that it's especially when you're dealing with international stuff that needs to be translated and understood, and articles and magazine scans, stuff like that. That stuff is a lot of hard work, and without that, a lot of content creators really don't have much to go off of. So I appreciate you being at the forefront of that and actually digging up this stuff. This is really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean it's my work with that's also a topic I wanted to talk a bit about, because of course I'm basically an historian. I mean, I haven't so far. I mean, I would like to, and probably I will do it. Yeah, I haven't, but so far I haven't done any video documentaries on anything I've researched. I should have probably done that earlier, but okay, that's beside the point. But yeah, as an historian, basically what I do is I go out of my way to try and research stuff that hasn't been done before. So, for example, um, the fact that the first time someone animated Sonic the Hedgehog, apparently in history, but of course I can say that with 100%. Every time you say that, someone's gonna come and say, no, that's not
Yeah,
true.
somebody's gonna do it. Yeah.
But with 90% certainty, I can say that the first time someone animated Sonic was in Italy, and they did that basically by tracing the few images of Sonic they had with paper and animating that for a commercial. So that's what was apparently the first time, and no one knew about that. So I went out. I basically stumbled upon that story, and I talked to the guy who done it, and the producers behind it. So that was a whole thing, for example, that no one had
That's
really
really
done,
cool.
because again, you need to go out and talk with people, because otherwise you're not gonna just find stuff. So that's one thing I want to talk about, because um, of course there are a lot of documentaries that, as you said, go out of their way to credit stuff, that do their own research, that talk with the creators, as you've done, for example, with that for Dark Earth, which was very interesting as well. Um, but a lot of times I've seen documentaries that don't really do that. I mean, I'm not saying they copy stuff. That's not my point really. It's just about not really, do any kind of research except what you already can find on the internet. So just basically, you know, take your
Yeah,
own
it's like
stuff.
yeah, and I'll say I'm probably guilty of that a little bit too. Definitely, videos can kind of be basically handmade video Wikipedia articles. Like that definitely happens. I see a lot of people do that as well, where they just collect a bunch of articles, or they just read the Wikipedia thing, rewrite it, and call it a day,
Yep.
basically. There's some channels that basically do that after every celebrity dies. They just like pull their history and all the
Ugh.
everything that's been written about him, and just throw together a video in a couple days, and man, you've got a million view video about this famous celebrity who died and how tragic it was and everything like that.
Jesus.
I it's easy to fall into that trap, and original research is hard. Original research is very hard. It's also a little bit kind of like not the same type of thing, but um it's like trying to find a new country or new island. Like everything has kind of already been mapped out for the most part. Not everything has been researched to its fullest extent, but most stuff you can find within a few Google searches or a few Bing searches. You can find most information about most things. So you don't really need to seem to really do much original research anymore. but I find that some of the most valuable content is when people actually dig into things that haven't been fully explored yet or haven't been fully documented yet. There is definitely there's a demand for more content and everything like that, and so quite often I do see people just pull information and turn it into video form, and that's they are essentially transforming it in the case of taking information, writing it again, rewriting it, and adding their own insight into it or their own opinions into it and turning it into a video. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but there is definitely I think a lack of originality in terms of YouTube content for sure.
Hmm. Which, I mean, for example, again, from my point of view of an historian, so basically just someone that writes for a reader, so not someone that turns things into video scripts, obviously, is the fact that, of course, I don't, for the most part, I don't have a huge problem in making something interesting. Of course, I have to edit things down. So I have 5 interviews, and I have to put them all together, bring them all together, take the what's interesting from each part, and bring them all into something that is interesting for the reader. Of course, that's obviously that's something that you have to do. And yeah, and there's editors, of course, but for the most part, for my experience, they just come in and make the article worse. But okay, that's that's a problem I've been having, and not all of the time, but yeah, let's say more than once. But okay. Um so of course, for me, that would be, for example, my main issue. And how do I make this interesting for a video? Because again, for my reader, it's just if you clicked on it, probably you are interested in what you're about to read, and probably I'm able to make it interesting for you as well. So you might read until the end, maybe, I don't know, probably, we'll see. But for a video, of course, that's definitely different. Like, how do you turn something, an interview that you've done, for example, even just via email, because a lot of people are not available to do even a phone call sometimes, or god forbid a video interview. So how do you make that interesting? For example, for me, that would be one of the main issues that I would have. So how is your creation process for a documentary regarding to that? How do you go about making things interesting for the viewer?
Yeah, I mean it's that's the big question, right? The You'll even notice that I would say the more audiovisual the you go with your content,
Mm-hmm.
the shorter the attention span. And
Yep.
now that isn't necessarily always the case. Like
No.
as you've seen, there's been the rise of like 6 hour, 8 hour, 12 hour documentaries and things like that. People do like long form content, but I would say that you have a much higher bar to clear. Like if somebody sees an article that is relevant to their interests, I think they'll. I mean, you could probably correct me if you have Google Analytics or whatever, but I would assume that their level of their attention span, because they're ready to read, they're ready to be interested by facts and quotes and interesting writing.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're on YouTube, or especially if you go to shorter form places like TikTok and stuff like that, their attention span is extremely short. So if you don't hook them right at the first couple seconds, then that will be a problem, and they'll click off, and your engagement analytics will reflect that. I've noticed more and more that especially in terms of YouTube recommending videos, they hold engagement as the highest of import
Mm-hmm.
of all metrics. It isn't even your like and dislikes might as well just be they might as well delete that feature. It doesn't matter anymore.
Mm.
Really, for the most part. Some of my most controversial videos are also my most liked. A lot of them. So, like the ones that have gotten the most vote downs are actually some of my most viewed videos. I don't make them controversial on purpose, but when I talk about Elder Scrolls or Fallout and why things have changed and why things have gotten better or worse,
Yep.
those are my most controversial videos, but they're also some of my most viewed videos.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the lengths that people will watch your video is the most important metric specifically for YouTube. I don't know how TikTok works. I kind of have a moral disagreement with TikTok, so I don't use that platform. But getting people to watch past the first 30 seconds, and especially to watch nobody watch. Very few people actually watch to the very end.
Of
But
course.
to get people to watch through most of it, or to watch through like a third of your video on average
Mm-hmm.
for a very long video, that's like the goal. But specifically to get past the first few minutes, that's actually a difficult thing, and I've struggled that before. I've tried to improve that because you can have an amazing video that 10% of people will watch and say, "Wow, this is the best video I've ever seen." But if 90% of the people leave within the first couple minutes, your video is going to bomb. There's just no avoiding that. So I've noticed content as a whole has changed. If you look at the way content is edited and presented, you'll notice that even if there's like an interview or a long podcast or whatever, it will start with a snippet preview. You'll see
Mm.
an interesting clip from like 5 to 20 minutes in. Will play at the beginning just to get you hooked, and then it'll start at the beginning,
Yep.
almost like a teaser or a
Mm-hmm.
trailer or whatever, right? Um, and you'll notice also, like, even if even really successful podcasters like Joe Rogan will release this entire interview with John Carmack or whomever, but then he'll also release a bunch of clips. Clip channels have become very popular because that's a way to cross promote and also to make easier to confront smaller snippets of your content, because there's some people who will want to sit down and listen to Joe Rogan talk to Elon Musk for 3 hours, but there's some people who just want to see a clip of him saying him lighting up a joint or whatever. It's like
Yep.
there's different angles, and sometimes them watching that small clip will get them interested enough to go watch the full length one. So there's lots of different angles you can go for it. How I've kind of evolved over time, like I used to kind of have a long runway before my videos, and sometimes those videos will still do well. Like I'd have like a 2 or 3 minute intro, and sometimes those videos still do well. But I've noticed I've been hit very hard with videos that do not perform well at the beginning. If there's a lot of drop off at the beginning, even
Mm-hmm.
if tens of thousands of people watched at the end, if there's a lot of drop off, YouTube will count that as this is not a very high engagement video. Let's recommend something else.
Yeah.
So I've kind of been getting into the habit of building a sort of a very strong hook at the beginning of my video. Like I think with my Miami Vice documentary, as well as my Diablo 3 development documentary, I made like a minute or two kind of like, even like a 30-second kind of like fast paced. Here's what you're getting. The juicy details kind of thing,
Mm.
sort of like a clip show to kind of get people interested. And that's, yeah, with the Diablo video worked. With Miami Vice, it worked to a lesser degree, but yeah, that's been a problem, just not just from getting recommendations, but also just getting people interested in your videos. So I would say that if you took like one of your articles, like word for word, that may or may not perform perfectly as a YouTube video, but I think there's a way to take that information and intrigue people, like ask a question, or like do a teaser, or grab like part of the most interesting part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Like take a fact, or take a like, did you know that in 1996 that or like 1990, I'm just spitballing, but like that 1/3 of Electronic Arts' income came from the Bullfrog game Populous. Like 1/3 of their income of the EA was from Populous one year. It's like, wow, that's a crazy figure. Well, let's watch this whole video about Populous or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of intriguing and hooking people in. And then on top of that, there's another tactic which is to hint at something that will happen later,
Yeah.
so people will stick along the ride. Not only hook them, but also say, "Hey, at the end, I'm going to talk about this." People can always skip later.
Mm-hmm.
That's always a possibility. But hook them in, and then get them to stay throughout the whole thing. That's like the magic. And as more and more people do that, it's going to become more difficult to do. But that's the goal of every content creator, is to do that.
Mm-hmm. Um, and speaking of the content itself, I mean, except for the hook, line, and sinker, so to speak.
Yeah.
Speaking of the content itself, you of course do the classic overall mix of interviews, big like pictures from developers, game footage, a little bit of yeah, perhaps some ads, artworks, depending on the game you're talking about. For example, Dark Sun has a lot of course, the great artworks from Brom. Uh, but yeah, you try to make it interesting. And of course, I always ask myself if I'm making a video on a almost unknown game. Then again, of course, the real question to ask is, would it be worth your time? Probably not. But yeah, let's pretend I'm not asking that question. So I don't care about engagements. I go about, okay, let's do this video on this pretty much unknown Commodore 64 game. So I come up with a good hook. So okay, the hook is fine, but since I don't really have a lot of material, sometimes not even the cover art really. I'm not joking.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't even have that. How do you make it visually interesting? That would be my question, because that a lot of time I would have I don't know, but perhaps I'm sure other people as well would have that problem. How do you really transform what would be okay in an article, because just put a little gameplay images and that, but of course you can make like a 20-minute video of just gameplay footage of a 1985 Commodore 64 game. I mean, you might, but we could definitely argue that's not really very interesting. So how would you go about it? I'm just curious.
Oh, it's brutal. I've covered a couple things that didn't have much. It's very hard to make a video without video or any visuals whatsoever. It's very difficult. With, for example, Dark Sun, I was talking about the setting, and I had gotten all the spot books, all of the the character creation guides, all of the the player's handbooks and things like that, and like version 4E, version 2E, and all that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, I probably put in like a good 5-10 minutes of like edited stock footage and
Mm-hmm.
3D renderings and things like that to kind of like flesh out the universe. So I kind of cobbled together enough visuals for that. But a couple of videos came to mind when you were talking about that. A friend of mine, Jular, who did the most successful Daggerfall video on the internet. I think he did like 5 million views or something.
Hmm.
And it's a comprehensive video. He did a huge video about Daggerfall,
Mm-hmm.
and he actually was. I think he mentioned that I was an inspiration or something, and I promoted his video early on. So he kind of he did way better than what I could have possibly promoted him. But yeah, he did really well. He did a video about one of the very obscure Bethesda game called 10th Planet, and that game maybe has, I want to say, maybe 2 minutes of very rough early alpha gameplay, and he made almost an hour video on
Wow.
that video game. And so that's a I would say that's like almost a masterclass of how you can make a very visually interesting video. I can send you a link in a second, but a very visually interesting video without having much footage. Uh,
Yep.
another video I saw recently, I forget, it's another good channel that he did a video about, remember Rockstar's Agent, the game
Mm.
that was supposed to come out for the PS3.
Yep.
Not
Mm-hmm.
There hasn't been a single official gameplay screenshot or video clip of that of that video game.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy made a video. I want to say it's at least like 20 minutes long or whatever, maybe even longer. And he kept me interested throughout the whole thing. He was able to, the way he talked about the game and the way he uh, essentially used references to other games, and he managed to, I think he found like the ArtStation page of one of the former artists for the game. They
Mm-hmm.
had a couple level design builds. He used a couple of those. He was able to cobble together enough visuals and enough interviews, and talking about Rockstar, he talked about the Rockstar studio head, and he talked about Sony, and then talked about showed some Sony conference footage. It's extremely difficult, and some of the most difficult video edits I've had to do is when I just did not have any visuals, or I'm talking about a book. Like I was talking about, like Snow Crash or Neuromancer, and that I have the cover art of the book, maybe a couple alternate cover designs. I have the author, and otherwise I just have text. So how do you visualize that? And I kind of have a rule in my videos that if it's a video, things should be moving. I'm not just going to show a static picture. Even if I show a static photo, I might add a little bit of like dust or
Hmm.
like debris or like visual effects, or I do a slow pan in just to get, there should be some motion. So it's very
Show don't
difficult.
tell.
For example, yeah, show don't tell. Yeah, I mean, obviously I do a lot of telling because it's voiceover, but at the same time, uh, y- y- you know, uh, there you should embrace the medium. So like for example, articles are excellent in terms of just raw data. You can get a lot more data, it's a lot more clear, and quotations are a lot more distinct. You know who's saying what at what time. You can give a lot more details in that. With voiceover, you're going to be a bit more, you know, you can be very matter of fact, but you might some of the details may stand out more, like emotion or emphasis. But maybe some of the details, like who's saying what, might be lost a bit. If you're
Mm.
quoting somebody, you may not have that in your mind as you would be reading or whatever. And then obviously with the visual medium, you can show additional information visually that you're not saying in the voiceover, where you can't really do that with an article. So each medium has its own ups and downs. But yeah, I will say firsthand that visualizing something without any details is incredibly tedious to edit.
Yeah, which is probably the answer to the question. Would it be worth it to do the 20 minutes whatever video on this game that you have no materials on? Probably not. But that's still, it might be still worth trying. Just to see what actually happens.
Yeah, and I posted those linked to those two videos. I would say those are some of the best. Yeah, the 15, almost a 16-minute video about Agent, which again has had zero official footage on,
Mhm.
and I want to say that 10th Planet video was almost an hour long. Yeah, 53 minutes long for a game that never even had like maybe had a trailer. Maybe it was like extremely underexposed. It never got released, and you could argue it was never even fully built. But yeah, those are great games because they would use comparisons. Like when you're talking about space sim aspects, Jular used like uh, examples from what were those games by well the Star Citizen guy made a bunch of space games, Mark Hamill and stuff. I'm drawing a
Wing
blank right
Commander.
now. Wing Commander, yeah, he'd like use Wing Commander, he'd use Freelancer, and like use various
Hmm.
games to kind of emphasize to kind of visualize, to simulate certain aspects of the game that were supposed to be built that he has no footage of. So it's
Hmm.
very clever. If
Hmm.
you ever want to kind of see how, and I talked to him a little bit about it, and he said like, yeah, it was an absolute nightmare to put together, but he's very proud of his work because he's able to make a 53 video going super deep dive about a game that basically was never shown off. So definitely tough, but I think it is possible.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's worth trying. That's if not to see what comes out of it. And so we mentioned Daggerfall, so I might as well talk about it. Uh, One of your most successful, or at least popular videos is about the Elder Scrolls, and
Yep.
right from the title, you don't really hide your feelings about it because it's called. If anyone hasn't seen it, yeah, I would recommend that you go watch it. But yeah, anyway, it's called Promise Unfulfilled,
Yep.
and I definitely let me start off by saying I completely agree with your take on the whole series, and I've been a fan of the series since not a lot of time, but yeah, I do remember getting into Daggerfall a bit after it was released. But I only had the demo for the longest time, so it was very
Yeah.
limited in scope.
Did you get one of those cool 3D boxes? The ones with like did you just like the disc, or did you
No,
you
unfortunately, I just
downloaded the
had a
demo?
disc. No, 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 no,
Yeah. Okay.
no boxes. Um, so of course, yeah, the demo doesn't really bring to the player the whole open world kind of of thing because
No,
it
not really.
is very limited. But again, I did not really have a lot of experience with RPG. This is something I also talked with Felipe Pepe a while ago. But yeah, my experience with RPGs was very, very limited. So I never played something like that before Daggerfall. I played Rings of Power, but I'm not gonna go into Rings of Power. Otherwise, someone's gonna say that I make all videos about Rings of Power. Um, and so yeah, Daggerfall was of course my kind of introduction to the whole how big an RPG can get and the whole 3D kind of thing and dungeon crawling as well. I mean, it wasn't of course all about dungeon crawling, but the demo was definitely 100% just dungeon crawling. So that was still my kind of introduction to dungeon crawling as well. And so when Morrowind came out, I skipped Battlespire. I mean, I got into Battlespire much later, but yeah, I had no idea that it had even come out, honestly. Um,
Most people did skip that game, so
yes, which it's not bad actually. It's quite interesting as a limited take on the idea, but yeah. So when Morrowind came out, I actually had no idea at first that it was connected to Daggerfall because again, yes, you knew that it was a series, but it wasn't really a series back then, still.
no, it wasn't nearly like Ultima. It was like capital U Ultima 4, where it was the Elder Scrolls was just kind of like you kind of missed it most of
Yeah,
the time. You
it
just
was
like
like Morrowind.
everybody knew it as Morrowind.
Yes, it was Morrowind, the Elder Scrolls 3.
Yeah, asterisk. Yeah.
Yes. So I played that at a friend's house and was like, whoa, I gotta get this game immediately. And so yeah, that Morrowind again was my first probably big open world RPG. So that was my first introduction, and I was completely hooked. I mean, it was like one of those games. I was in university back then, and basically I used to bring with me a notebook during lessons when I had my whole like quest book written down of all the quests that I had to do. I was just planning what to do when I
You're
came
like
back home.
you're like English, mathematics, quests, NWA fetcher, so and so.
Exactly, what to do in Sedanin when you're dead, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was really completely hooked. I mean, I actually had a pirate copy, but I bought it just to say I bought a game that I like because I didn't have a lot of money
Yeah.
back then. But it was like I need to buy Morrowind just to show my support to Todd and the guys. Um, but yeah, so it was really life changing, and I did see that kind of promise unfulfilled thing when I played Oblivion and I played Skyrim, and it was like to put it politely again, diminishing returns, so to speak. Um, so yeah, I wanted to ask you, how was I mean, I think you played Arena first, right?
No,
In the series.
actually, this is during the era. I don't know if you remember. I don't know how many box games you could buy or what was available in Italy at the time, but a lot of games would actually release the sequel. I
Mhm.
remember this happening at least two or three times. Heroes Might Magic 2, for example, came with a disc that actually came with I think it had a bonus disc that came with Heroes Might Magic 1,
Mm.
and I want to say King's like not King's Quest. We were like I'm like completely drawing a blank. What was the game that preceded Heroes Might Magic?
Proceed, Heroes Might and Magic.
Um,
Um, yeah, that
Original.
it's King something. King's Lore? No.
I'm like drawing a blank. I've played it
King's
and they did a
Bounty.
reboot. King's Bounty. There you go. Yeah, the original King's Bounty. So yeah, Here's My Magic 2. When I got that, and I was like one of my favorite games. I love that game. But
Mm-hmm.
it came with a bonus disc that had the original heroes as well as King's Bounty.
Hmm.
Same thing with Daggerfall. The box version I got, I think it even had a sticker on the front that said it came with Arena.
Oh.
So I bought Daggerfall, but it came with Arena. So
Hmm.
I played Arena. I think after Daggerfall,
Okay.
or like alongside it. And I was like, oh, I wonder how it was. And even at the time, it was just shocking how much more advanced Daggerfall was, even just 2 years later, because Arena had the sort of it had like the Ultima Underworld kind of controls where you like click and like drag on the side. You
Yeah.
could technically turn, but it's very very sluggish. No mouse look, no elevation, things like that. But I was very impressed, and I remember being, wow, I can't wait until we make a new game with every single region of Tamriel in it, and we wouldn't see that for another 20 years or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I played Daggerfall first, but I did play Arena shortly after because it came with the box. But Daggerfall was definitely more my jam. I played Arena, and it took me a while to even get out of the first dungeon. The beginning arena is pretty tough. If you ever played like Eye of the Beholder or any of those other like early dungeon crawlers, it was like that. Like the getting out of the first dungeon was tough. People talk about Daggerfall being tough. Daggerfall is actually not that tough to get out of Privateer's Hold. You can actually kind of run through most of it if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
And if you played it like 100 times, like I have, it's like okay, oh, I don't have a steel, or I don't have a silver weapon. Okay, so I'll just skip the imp. I'll go up the stairs. Skeleton. Yeah, I'll just go around the other way and skip the skeleton. And like you kind of get the idea. I'm sure if you played Arena enough times, you'd be able to do that too. But yeah, it was interesting because I think that kind of Daggerfall probably kind of suffered a little bit because um, there wasn't really the sort of first person RPG open world genre to compare it to. Now people
Yeah.
are like, oh yeah, it's a Bethesda game. But at the time, Daggerfall was just something so new and interesting and different that it's hard to even sell people on that idea because it wasn't really a thing. Like, yeah, we had Ultimate games and stuff like that, but those were from like the top down or uh, you know, some of them were like kind of a top down, some of them were sort of
Isometric.
a isometric. Eventually, we got Ultima Ascension, which was terribly received, but that was years later.
Yeah.
But yeah, Daggerfall was just something so new. Like there were first person games, and there were obviously Doom was big at the time, Heretic, things like that. But it wasn't anything like that. It was you could literally walk for miles through the woods if you wanted to, and just attack bears and make potions and stuff. And it's interesting because I think that if people really could have, I guess got a better view of that. There was like a trailer, but even the trailer was kind of like not many people saw it because the
Mm.
internet was still very young. I think that was probably one of the issues with the game, other than the stability issues, which is very unstable and bugs and stuff like that. I think it was a hard time kind of even giving people that full concept. I don't even remember the ads for the game either. I think it was just mostly the skull guy with the claw reaching through and it's like, prepare to meet your new obsession, which sounds cool, but doesn't really give you the entire scope of what you're giving. And I think that was
Yeah.
a big problem with a lot of games is just getting that idea across of what you could do in this game and why it was different. I remember probably the biggest disappointing marketing campaign I would say from memory is I would say like Magic Carpet. Somebody got the
Mm.
idea that they should promote Magic Carpet, Bullfrog's Magic Carpet as a Doom clone. Which, if you ever played that game,
Oh.
it's almost nothing like Doom.
Nope.
It is first person, and you do shoot things, but it's pretty
That's
much
where
as
it
far
ends.
away from a Doom clone as you could possibly think. That
Yeah.
it's basically a first person God game, which is incredible, and very few games have ever tried that to do that. But yeah, and when you play, you're like, wow, this is crazy. I can like destroy mountains and create volcanoes and build castles in 3D, right? And things like that. But if you read the I think even when the ad just said like it's basically like forget Doom, play this game. It's like no, Doom's way better at just shooting monsters, but Magic Carpet does so much more than that.
It was the 90s equivalent of clickbait, basically.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Mention Doom in your ad and you're fine for the most part. Get people to click on your ad. Um, but yeah, and one thing I was thinking, going back to the evolution of the Elder Scrolls games, and you can kind of see it also in the early Bethesda games, Terminator games, that they were really trying to do something different from other first-person shooters, let alone tie-in games, movie tie-in games, which were, for the most part, awful. And of
Yeah,
course, yeah, the Terminator games were not perfect, obviously, but they had a lot of interesting ideas, and they were very different also from other shooters at the time. They would definitely try something different, perhaps a little bit again. So maybe that's the term I'm thinking about. Over ambitious for the time, fighting against the
yeah,
limits of technology, which is also a problem that I think Daggerfall had in a way. Arena for sure. Arena obviously it's very limited in what the technology could do at the time. But Daggerfall, yes, expanded it, but still, kind of went against how much you can expand your world, how much you can make it breathable, livable, and believable also for the player. And with Morrowind, I think it kind of hit that sweet spot, maybe, in that, as you also mentioned, I think in the video, it was a huge jump in technology from Daggerfall to Arena, which is something that sometimes people forget that even in the 90s, because you made a comparison between the 2000s and the 90s, but even in the 90s, just a few years were a huge jump in technology. So even like a game from 1998 compared to a game from 1994, they were kind of two different countries really, and it was just 4 years. So like there
oh
was.
yeah. I make that my favorite comparison is let me get my years right. um Unreal, which still looks great today. 1998, and Wolfenstein 3D. Wolfenstein 3D was what, 6 years before
Yeah,
Unreal?
92.
Look at a game made 6 years ago. It looks exactly the same as a game made
You can
today.
tell. You
But
can tell the difference.
Wolfenstein 3D was a single plane, um, software rendering only, DOS based, could run on a 286 practically, maybe a 386, and you know CGA basically, maybe EGA color scheme. 6 years later, Unreal, 3D video effects, DirectX, dynamic lighting, pseudo real time reflections, all of like the whole 9 yards, and then yeah, that was absolutely an insane jump in technology in just a handful of years.
Yeah. One thing that maybe that now I'm thinking randomly about it, Unreal ad that was kind of old still was kind of the Amiga like mod soundtrack, which was kind of a nostalgic bit that they put in. But yeah, that spoke to the fact that they were coming from
Well, yeah,
technology.
that was like actually a stylization choice. Highly recommend. Ahoy did this video about that type of music. They're called trackers.
Darkness.
You ever heard of, yeah, trackers? It kind of started in the demo scene, like the Euro demo scene, where like people would do this music, and quite often actually got kind of popular in the kind of pirated copy scene, because they'd often like play a tracker
Yeah,
while you're
demo scene.
installing or loading or whatever. But I highly recommend Hoy's video about that. He explains the whole thing. And Michiel Van de Bos, I might be butchering his name, and Alexander, totally forgot his last name, but the guys who did Unreal, Deus Ex, and like a few other soundtrack,
Hmm.
very very legendary guys. They came from the tracker scene, so that's kind of like how they got into electronic music. And so even some of the most popular songs in Deus Ex were tracker songs. And so, and that was basically MIDI. Best I can explain it, being kind of layman, MIDI, but with custom samples, basically. Custom samples for each note and things like that. But because you would do like 20 different sounds, short little sounds, and then play those in different rhythms and different things, you could essentially compress what would be a 10-20 megabyte MP4 file into less than a megabyte, because trackers are very compressed for that. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's a very interesting technology. And it's kind of it still had a sort of a long people still do it today, just because it's kind
Yeah.
of a cool bit of tech.
Hmm. Yeah, it was that nostalgic touch that was interesting in Unreal. The fact that it was all current gen, even though we didn't use that term back then, but okay, current gen
Yeah.
technology, the latest technology looks cool, but it was a trackers that was still kind of an Amiga thing. So that's it. But yeah, that's a different conversation. So yeah, going back to Elder Scrolls. So I think Morrowind, yes, it hit that sweet spot. And from then on, it was all about not really, again, going back to that idea that they started off with, but just trying to make the game more palatable to a wider audience, trying to make it more appealing to a kind of wider audience. So not really going in any, I would say that's really my personal opinion. Obviously, the interesting artistic directions. I mean, not saying that LB looks bad or Skyrim looks bad again, but that's doesn't really do anything interesting as much as Morrowind and Daggerfall did. So I don't know if you touched upon this point in the video. I don't remember, but I don't know if you agree with this. But the fact that from basically from Morrowind on, the main problem for the series was trying to not really going back to the old idea of making this huge open world game, but rather trying to make it work for as many people and console as possible.
Yeah, I know that was the big problem with Oblivion, is that not only was the setting a lot more generic fantasy, but also
Mm.
because Oblivion was the first Elder Scrolls game with console as lead platform, they had to make major concessions. Like they couldn't, even Morrowind, as huge, it's seemingly huge in 3D and everything it was. They actually were able to make um, nearly seamless. Like I think there might have been occasional hitches where you had to like
Hmm.
kind of queue up a zone, but mostly zoneless world. Like you go from one to a town, you go to Balmora, and you leave it, and you're in the same world. With PC nowadays, like you don't even practically even zone. But with Oblivion, they had to do that, and they even had to split up towns and stuff because there's just too much to load, too many NPCs, and the way they were handling it, it was just too much for the Xbox 360 to handle. So they had to like split up the Imperial City, make it smaller, and split up each district into its own zone.
Mm.
And because of that, um, they realized that if they kept certain mechanics like, say, levitation in the game, you would actually be able to use levitation, and you would technically be able to levitate over the Imperial City walls, and you'd find that there's nothing in there because that's just like a fake little shell of the city, and
Mm-hmm.
you'd have to zone inside. So they actually had to kill certain mechanics from the game because of limitations with memory and console and everything like that. And I think that considering some of the stuff we've seen over the years, I think it was probably a lack of technical skill. Like you come to me and say, how would you code it better? I would have no idea. But I've seen games using much less hardware do similar results. So like I think it would be technically possible, but you'd have to do some basically programming wizardry and memory management to make it work. A great example of that, like I might cover it one day if people find it interesting. But there was a essentially, remember a Deadly Premonition for the 360 and PC?
Of course.
Somebody basically tried to do that back on the PlayStation 1. It's called Mizurna Falls. I don't know if you've ever read
Ah,
about it,
yeah. Oh, mm-hmm.
but yeah, it's basically Twin Peaks for the PS1. It was actually I think 1997 maybe, and it was like
Mm.
essentially did what GTA did on the PlayStation 1, which is insane when you think about it. It had full vehicle control, open world city, NPCs. It's like Shenmue. It was like Shenmue slash GTA, only like 5+ years before those games came out. Really, really impressive stuff. But if you can do that, I would assume you could probably pull that off in the 360 somehow. But as we've seen, that there's nobody else who quite makes games just like Bethesda, but they've had a long, ever since the beginning, they've had issues with technical stuff. Even Arena launched very buggy, and they had to release a patch later. So it's been historically ambitious, historically very interactive, big worlds, but they've had issues with the technical side ever since the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, obviously, yes. I also mentioned about the mod scene, and you talked about in the video. You talk about how a lot of times, in especially in the later games, of course, from the Elder Scrolls, mod creators come in and seem to give the fans what they want, as opposed to to actually Bethesda doing it. Which is, I mean, of course it's fair because obviously mods are usually created by fans for fans. So obviously, a
Yeah,
fan should know more or less what the community wants, of course. So that's and they are not, they're basically most of the time working for free, not under any time limitations or management wants results. So yeah, of course you can't really compare it, but it is it is honestly sometimes, maybe I can say it, even sad that like how much Bethesda, but we can really say that for other developers as well, seem to fail to listen to what fans actually want. Of course, you might say sometimes you do listen, and that's a very bad thing as well. Yes, of
sure.
course. But yeah, it is. I don't know. It is kind of sad sometimes that they seem to fail to apply these things that yeah mod creators can usually do in sometimes even a couple of weeks after the release of game.
Yeah, probably the most famous example was the infamous Dark Souls PC launch. Like,
Mm.
because Dark Souls didn't come out on PC at first, but
Yep.
then I think when it did come out on PC, it had terrible like broken this and terrible video settings, and I think the frame rate was capped and all this other stuff. Right. I
Mm-hmm.
think the first day somebody had fixed most of like the biggest issues. Just some dude just fixed the biggest issues, not having the source code, not having any of that. He was just able to figure out what was wrong and what people are complaining about, and address it in the first day. And that's what's kind of incredible is that Sometimes people in the community are just really good at understanding and addressing needs that you'd think that the professionals in the field would do. Now, obviously, no, at least in their prime, I don't think most modders would come up with something as original and as expansive and as immersive as, say, Morrowind. Morrowind had a lot of artistic and flavor, art direction, writing, and execution that I would say most modders who are being very inexperienced and very limited and having basically no budget would be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
But as you've seen with over the years, like there's a project that's trying to put the entire like basically make put arena into the Skyrim engine where they're trying to create every single region, anything from the Cyrodiil to High Rock to every elsewhere, all these different regions into one cohesive world. If people could buy the quality of like Skyrim Enhanced Edition or whatever they called it, or even the Anniversary Edition, because it's been over 10 years now.
Yeah.
But that level of experience and have the entirety of Tamriel, that would sell like hotcakes, and that's what modders are doing. And I think a lot of Bethesda's success and popularity is indirectly due to how many the easiness of their tools, like their ease of tools and the power of their toolkit. Even before their official toolkit, people were already modding Starfield and things like that. So they
Yep.
don't even need to release all the tools to be able to do that. So people are incredibly talented, and what I think of the advantage of modders is that they're able to prototype, they're able to release early versions of things, and able to do crude uh, iterations on things that they can are immediately accessible. They don't have to be approved by some five executives and assigned a budget and greenlit and prototyped and proposed for 5 months before they even get a team assigned to them, things like that. Which there's a ton of diminishing returns and a ton of red tape that you have to deal with when you work at a big company. Whereas in the mod scene, hey, here's a DLL. This fixed your widescreen issue. Done.
Yes, of course, it's definitely way simpler when you don't have to worry about legal issues and management and money, which it ties back to what you were saying about being a content creator in the first question we asked a while ago. Um, but but this is something that I've been thinking about, and of course, this is also the big question, right? And we've been talking about open world. We mentioned open world a lot. Um, the fact, of course, is a lot of games recently have gone towards the open world or procedurally generated idea, even though sometimes it doesn't really seem necessary or doesn't really seem to add a lot to the gameplay. But okay. So, what I was thinking about is how do you really nail that sweet spot between making the player play, sorry for the wordplay there, making the player immerse in a world that's actually interesting to play, that's as content that one would be interested in, as opposed to just making them free to roam in an open world that has just a few points of interest here and there scattered throughout, but for the most part NPC all say the same things, and they don't really have anything interesting for you to do except for a few side quests here and there. But yeah, it's, of course, I understand it's a way to fill the player's time, right? To make them justify the price, because people get incredibly mad when they say, "Oh, this game is just 10 hours." Good God, no, I don't want to play that. I want to play something other
Yeah.
that's at least 70 hours because I hate my free time. I hate doing something else that's just playing another Final Fantasy. Sorry. Uh, okay.
Persona is like, yeah, if a Persona game releases with less than 120 hours of gameplay, it's like it's a piece of trash, right?
Yes. Or I played it recently. Even the latest, Like a Dragon, has a bit of the same problem. There's a lot
Yeah.
of side content that seems like the main content is not really that relevant anymore because you have so much stuff to do. That's not the main story that you would think about. Okay, what was the main story about again? I forgot about 20 hours ago. So that's what actually happens. What do you think about it? How do you hit, or what games do you feel hit that sweet spot between freedom, open world, and but making it interesting?
Yeah, it's kind of it's one of those questions, right? I have a lot of thoughts about that. I think there's a certain breed of open world games that have made open world a kind of a dirty word. Like there was a period of time where, oh my God, it's open world, I gotta have it. Like there
Uh,
was probably the kind of open world craze. I want to say like 2000. I mean, pretty much GTA through probably GTA through GTA 3 actually, or GTA 3 through GTA 5 was probably the sweet spot. Every open world game, oh my God, I got to have it. You know,
mhm.
Assassin's Creed, Far Cry 2, Far Cry 3, you know, that whole era of games. There was a point where that became like a dirty word, and I think why that is because the open world games that were offensive to people were you have this, it's basically level 1 through level 50, you know, like mission 1, mission 2, mission 3, mission 4, but you could do it in any sequence pretty
Mm.
much, or each, like the first set of 10 missions you could do in whatever sequence.
Mhm.
That as an open world is extremely boring. If you're doing the same exact things exactly the same way, but you can do it in any sequence, why bother? Why not just make them, you know, levels? Guess you get a little bit of choice, but you have to do them in anyway. It's basically at that point you're basically Mega Man, which are fine games, but remember in Mega Man you could have like you could play a Cut Man, or you know you could fight against a Slash Man or Fireman or whatever, right? But you could do them in different sequence, but in the end there was pretty much you should I don't remember all their weaknesses, but I remember Mega Man X, for example. You'd always do Frost Penguin first because he was the easiest boss to kill, and
Yeah.
his ability was really good against this guy, so you do him next, and you get his ability and he's really good against that guy. So there was basically a level 1, 2, 3, 4,
Yeah.
but you had the choice to do them
The
at a sequence
illusion of
anyway.
freedom, so to speak.
Yeah, the illusion of choice, but it doesn't really matter. It's kind of like a lot of dialogue you see now in games where it's like people, you've seen the memes where it's like, yes, sarcastic, yes, no, yes, later. You know, it's all basically the same option, but you give the illusion that you have some sort of grand choice in the matter and consequences and stuff like that. So I'd say that the open world games that kind of give open world a dirty name are ones that you essentially are doing the same things in the same way, just you can kind of do them out of sequence, or the games that actually have like random encounters or different side objectives, but they're like one of three different repeat objectives. Like as much as I like the original Assassin's Creed, that had a big problem with it, where there would be, you know, I think I haven't played it for ages, but like there'd be like somebody getting attacked or
Mhm.
robbed or mugged or something like that in the street, and you'd save them, and they're like, thank you, stranger, or whatever, but then you see that exact scenario 20 more times just at random times throughout the world. And so it kind of feels a little fake. It doesn't really feel very immersive, so you'd have to like either create increase the variety of those. Like I think Watch Dogs was a similar one where you could see a crime in progress and like pull it up on your cell phone and like, oh yeah, I want to take that guy down. And that was super cool. Being like a open world vigilante was a super cool idea. But once you've done it 10 times, you kind of get, okay, there's this type of mission, there's this type of mission, there's a kidnapping, there's a mugging, there's a, you know, murder, whatever. And so it gets very repetitive. Um, I think that the biggest problem with open world games is like you said, the distinguishing between primary and secondary objectives. You ever go down like a hallway in a game where you're like, oh, this looks like the way I'm supposed to go. I'm gonna go the other way because I want to get that loot or whatever was down that the other hallway. I think that that kind of mentality kind of almost kind of defeats the purpose of an open world. I think the end game of an open world game is not actually having a distinction between secondary and primary objectives. I think that the ideal open world would be you can do whatever, and that's your story. So like every objective is your primary objective and your secondary objective. It's your optional objective. So I think that a true open world wouldn't have the big red mark. This is where you need to go next. But if you want to, you can find somebody's kitten, or you know, clean somebody's shed, or find a lost, a lost lawnmower or whatever. Like all these little side things, you obviously know that are side things, and like, oh, I'll do those if I need more experience or loot or whatever. But I need to go to this big red dot here.
Mhm.
I think that the end game of open world is to let the game give you all these different cool, interesting scenarios to do, and how you do those will determine your next step of the story, and the story will conform to what you do rather than you conforming to the story. Because one of the big problems is that, yeah, you have all these side objectives, but you cannot progress unless you go to the next main objective. And I think that's kind of a problem because people are still stuck in the, map mission 1, mission 2, mission 3 zone. This just gives you a couple more things to do along the way. So I think that people are kind of still stuck with that linear progression of story rather than, hey, this is a big world. Maybe you just want to be a farmer. Maybe you want to actually go out there and slay that dragon. Oh, you're too small. Well, the dragon's going to kill you, but you could potentially kill him. Or maybe you want to become a king. Maybe you want to become a robber baron. And of course, that's extremely ambitious, but I think that's kind of the end game. And I think we're making baby steps toward that. I think like Baldur's Gate 3, for example, is a good example of just like making baby steps to what an open world game will eventually be. And obviously, that was a very, very deep, huge, interactive game. But I think that going more in that direction, I think that'll be the end game, is that there will be no such thing as a main objective or a side objective.
Mm-hmm. So in a bit, you're saying open world and open ended should like be something that goes together, at least in theory, but also in practice.
Yeah, I just think that a lot of open world games are kind of fake, where they say that the world is your oyster and you can do whatever you want, but you can't really.
Yeah.
Three quarters of the map are blocked off. That the city to the bridge to the other part of Liberty City is blocked off for whatever reason, even though there's millions of people living in Liberty City. You can't go over there yet. There's a roadblock. You're going to get shot by the police until you do a couple missions, and magically the roadblock clears. Things like that. Same thing with Cyberpunk 2077. They block off certain parts of the map until you do certain objectives and go to a certain part of the story. And so at that point, you're basically, it almost becomes it's almost like a hub world at that point. You're not really even you're not really even allowed to do much in the world until you progress to the next main story mission. So yeah, I obviously don't want to make it so open, but at the same time, like Daggerfall is that way. You can kind of go wherever. Obviously, there's certain specific dungeons and certain events that are only unlocked when you do certain story moments. But one of the most open world games I can think of, probably Fallout 2. Fallout 2, you can actually go to the end boss, sure. the end mission within 15 minutes if you know exactly where to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's kind of insane.
It is true. I don't know. Sometimes I feel that we, along the way, we forgot, or maybe we never learned. Okay, that designing your game, like we're talking mainly about RPGs and the likes. Designing your game, the structure of your game should go together with the gameplay, obviously, but also with the writing, so that everything should feel like cohesive, so to speak. So it should be everything like a single rock single pillar. So sorry, rather that the player can experience. But sometimes it just feels very separate. Like you do these things for the gameplay, not really for the writing, because there's not much writing there. There's kind of side quests and missions. Oh, but yeah, there's other stuff that it feels like very good writing, and there's other quests. It's more. It feels like it got a little separated at some point, or perhaps it was always separated. And I'm just being delirious. But I do feel like that anything you should put in your open world game should have a meaning, and for it to have a meaning, of course, it has to be written in a way that makes sense for whoever is playing it. Obviously, of course, not everything can be of the same quality. That's something that we should always remember. So you should not always expect 100% narrative, engaging, emotional. Of course not, but it still should have a meaning of why it's there and why it is placed there. But that's something that I don't think we really approach so far. I mean, we again, as you said, maybe baby steps. We're taking some baby steps towards it, but still, it structurally, from a design standpoint, there still isn't a huge difference from, like, I don't know, Phantasy Star 2, the way the NPC in Phantasy Star 2 were taken around the map. and the way that NPC in a huge open world RPG are plays today. There's still not that huge of a difference as one would expect. There's still more or less serve the same purpose and don't really matter in the in the long run, which fair again. Why, yeah, of course, but and that brings me to another thing that for me is, again, another thing that I've seen pop up in any kind of open world RPG, action adventure, whatever games, that for me like breaks completely the illusion and also breaks the narrative. So again, I don't know why everyone puts it. I guess people like it. Crafting.
Yeah.
Now, per se, I don't have anything against crafting. I mean, it's not something that I hate or even dislike. It's fine. I'm neutral towards crafting. But the thing is, I find it horrendously funny. Maybe funny is not the right word, but yeah, out of place funny. When there's something going on and you're on a mission, important mission, like you have to save your little brother or you have to save your beloved. Okay, well, first let's stop and craft some things because I have to upgrade my dagger so now it does
Yeah.
1 point more of damage. I mean, of course, it makes sense gameplay wise, but again, we're back to what I was saying. It makes sense gameplay wise. It doesn't make sense from a narrative standpoint because if you're in a hurry, you have an important mission, you would not stop to do. Okay,
Yeah.
let me craft some good poison for my dagger. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a Fallout 4 is probably the biggest example of that, where it's like, oh my God, my baby son, he's out in the wild, he's been kidnapped, and let me craft like 500 things and fix up this old gas station, and a couple months can go by, I don't care. And it's like I really want to build a nice sofa. I really want a sofa, and maybe some I do a little gardening here. It's like, what happened? What happened to your son? Is like, all right, I have a son. I should probably go save him. It's just, yeah, it gets thrown around a lot, but yeah, the lunar narrative dissonance. It's a terrible phrase, but yeah, that's the kind of thing. And I kind of like it when games kind of like call you out on that a little bit,
Hmm.
where if you're doing something that if you're role playing, in this case, it is a role playing game. If you're role playing and you are acting out of character, people should kind of call you out on it. Little things like, oh, in every RPG or whatever in Deus Ex, you just check every room. There might be some cool stuff. Might be some potato chips in that cabinet. You don't know. Let's go check it out. In the first Deus Ex, for example, famously, if you go to every single office in UNATCO and then go into the women's bathroom as JC Denton, a woman will say, "What are you doing in here? Get out!" Right? And then you go and you get called out by your boss later, and it's like, and remember, Denton, stay out of the ladies' restroom. It's just like little things like that are like, oh yeah, you know what? I probably shouldn't be doing that. I'm role playing, right? So if games kind of called you out on that, that's just that it's a scripted moment. They had to code that manually, but if a game would acknowledge you a bit more about that, like I'd say even Fallout 2 did this a little bit better, where your whole mission is to you're from Arroyo and you have to find um, the Garden of Eden creation kit to essentially turn your dying little landscape into lush greenery farms, things like that, right? And if you get too sidetracked, it's like, I'm gonna go kill some rad scorpions and make some guns and do all sorts of cool stuff. Or I'm gonna go pimp my wife out at this sleazy town over here and make some extra money. Eventually you'll get like visions from your shaman back in town saying that their people are dying and they're starving and you must save us and everything like that. And I don't know if there's any actual, I don't remember if there's any super long term uh, things that happen if you take too long in Fallout 2, because I know that was a little bit of a sticking point in Fallout 1. But in Fallout 1, if you took too long, people would die. People would
Yep.
die in your town, and if you there's a point in Fallout 1 where you essentially stir up the hornet's nest that is known that are the super mutants, and they will actually start destroying towns over time. So there's actually like a real time consequence to your actions if you do not follow your mission. And essentially, it's a very thematic time limit, but it actually makes you kind of feel like, oh crap, you go back to this town that you've gone to before, the hub. That might have been Fallout 2, but go back to one of these places in Fallout 1, and it's like, oh, everybody's dead now
Hmm.
because of me, and you kind of feel the weight of your actions. And I don't think Fallout 4 has any of that. Like it doesn't
Mm.
matter if you go see your son, that day or in 2 years. It doesn't matter. It's gonna everything's gonna happen the way it happens. A great game I think that um, people criticized. Well, I think the people that really enjoy the game actually like that aspect a lot, but some people had a hard time with probably Dead Rising. Dead Rising did a fantastic job of that, where
True.
it's a zombie apocalypse. These people are being attacked by zombies in the makeup store right now. So if you take longer than an hour to go and save them,
They
they're going to
died.
be dead.
Mm.
And she told you that she'd meet you in the food court at 2 o'clock. It's 3 o'clock. She's not there anymore. You missed her. You won't be able to get her this run. So things like that, I think, really give you a sense of immersion because, oh crap, they died because I was off, trying to get a golf club at the sporting goods store. I should have probably gone and saved them.
Yeah,
Uh,
even going back to older, like not really RPG, but let's say adventure RPG, like Quest for Glory: Shadows of Darkness from what was it, '94, I think. Even that game has some very limited quests that the game lets you know that. So it's not a classic Sierra Dead End, but
yeah,
the game actually lets you know that you know this guy. I'm talking about the Domovoy, who for whoever's played it, only appears certain nights, and he needs help from you because he needs to go back to his original form. And if you don't hurry, he's gonna stay in his. I think it was like a wooden statue or something. But yeah, he's not gonna turn into your original form. So of course, I mean, if you play the first time, it's like, okay, but why do I need to hurry? I mean, what's my reward in making this guy turn into a? Of course, you discover later that if you miss that, like I did, of course, I think many people did the first time I played it. That's basically your own dead end because that's
yeah,
the guy needs you to tell you some very specific things that you need to do, and if you miss that on that, that's it basically. You can
yeah, soft
play,
locked.
but yes, you can play, but then in the end, of course, the days pass, and basically the vampire takes over, or yeah, whoever was it, and then you die at the end. So basically, yes. So yeah, you could really like make a sense of urgency, a sense of immersion if you needed to. But yeah, apparently it's more important to stop and craft potions or new weapons. Um,
And I
Thinking
think
of
that's probably kind of just a symptom of people see this as a popular thing. Like I
mm,
think they added crafting in Dead Space, and they added, and that actually kind of makes sense because engineer sort of.
mm,
Well, I thought actually they had crafting in the beginning as well, but they definitely upped the level of crafting in Dead Space 3. I remember
yeah,
that. But people see these mechanics like, I think Minecraft was popular around the time, so Fallout 4 is like, oh, let's let them build bases and craft and do all this other stuff, and that's all fine and good, but does it make sense really within your story? Now, in the case of Fallout 4, I think it does make sense because it is post-apocalyptic world.
sure,
Manufacturing plants aren't working. You're going to be, putting things together and scrounging for materials and stuff like that. But
mm,
not every game should really require that or should really even call for that. Like, are you going to be crafting bullets, for example? How do you craft bullets with your hands?
who knows?
So one of my favorite silly crafting things. It's funny because it makes 100% sense
Mm,
thematically, but it makes zero sense practically. I'm actually a big defender of the game, even though a lot of people hate it. It was the Alone in the Dark 2008 remake or
wow.
reboot. Most people hate it. I'll defend. The story sucks. There are a lot of things that suck about it, but there's a lot of. I'll say this: it's the most ambitious survival horror game ever made. That's a fact.
Hmm,
It
we
is
might
the
agree on
most
that.
ambitious survival horror game. Is it the best? No,
No.
but probably the best fire engine ever made in a game. You could
Hmm,
actually like you could take something flammable, stick it into fire. It would start igniting at the end, and it would turn into embers. And you could actually touch that against a wooden wall, and that'll spread organically throughout the whole room,
true. Yeah.
burning organic materials. So it's super cool. And the whole idea was that the monsters in that game could only be killed by fire.
Mm,
Okay, you could kill them, but they'd regenerate. So you could only give them final death through fire. And that usually meant shoot, 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 drag their body, stick it in the fire. That was the easiest way. But you could like grab a chair, break a chair leg off, light it on fire, and use it as like a torch and kill guys that way.
mm-hmm.
Really, really interesting game. Controls were bad. of things were bad about the game, but it was really, really ambitious in that aspect. Um, oh yeah, and one of the really cool things about the game that people didn't really like is that there was no inventory screen. You looked down and you opened up your coat pockets, and you had all your jacket pockets were inventory slots. So you could see like first aid spray, bullets, gun, flammable liquid, things like that. You could craft like stitch things together and craft right there. Super cool, super immersive, and time would slow down but not completely stop on your inventory. So if guys were attacking you, you pull open your jacket and you're like, oh, get some gum, some whatever snacks, they'd kill you. But my favorite thing about that was that one of the most effective weapons in the game, because I think you only had a pistol. I don't think you ever got a better gun, which
Yeah.
probably would have made the game more popular. Um, one of the most effective things is to take your bullets, your cartridges, which have your bullets and everything like that, pour some gasoline on top, and then put them back into the magazine, and those became fire bullets.
Yes.
And they would not only shoot, they would not only damage them, but also light them on fire, which is great, right? Doesn't make any sense at all in reality, because I would immediately ignite, with gas and everything like that. But it was just funny that you just like pour some gasoline over bullets and magically they're now dragon's breath, cartridges or whatever. But again, it's just like that's kind of disconnect between reality and gameplay and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that game was something, all right. I think we can make a whole podcast about that that game.
I want to do a video about it, and I could probably do some sort of clickbait like, you know, I'm a so and so apologist, or the best game that nobody played or whatever. But I don't think it's a great game. I just think there's things that were done in that game that have never been done again, and for better or for worse. Like that game, it's some crazy ambitious stuff. So
And speaking of Alone in the Dark, speaking of Fredrik Reinal, have you played his kind of indie title, Too Dark?
I really want to, because I know that was by the original Alone in the Dark designer, and I love the original Alone in the Dark. Actually, like every iteration of Alone in the Dark, except for like maybe the recent ones, I'm not like those so much. But I like the new Nightmare or whatever it was, the next Nightmare, new Nightmare.
Yep.
That was a third.
That was a Resident Evil ripoff, basically, yeah.
Yeah, but it was pretty good. But no, you know what really turns me off is the art style. Too Dark just looks too goofy. I really wish there was a different art style for that game. But I would do want to try it from a mechanical standpoint, because it does look really interesting.
Yeah, it does a lot of very interesting things. It also goes very extreme in its themes it's not something that you would see from like at least like a renowned developer, or something like that. Kind
Yeah.
of yeah. Um,
The characters look kind of silly, but the environments actually look quite good. I should give it a shot. Now that you say it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to finish it, but I played it like 3 times, and I think on PC there's like a game breaking back at some point that you're just stuck on. I think it was chapter 4. Maybe I'm just unlucky, but I did try it. Like I restarted the game 3 times, and 3 times I had the same exact bug at chapter 4. So I could never finish it, and I found online that a lot of other people were having the same problem. So
That's too bad.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe if you can grab a hold of a console port, I don't know which console is even active anymore, but yeah, that would probably be. But yeah, that's interesting. I think you would probably find get some enjoyment out of it. It's still very interesting. I mean, I'm sad that I could never finish it, because it's not a good game overall, but it does a lot of interesting stuff. So it's similar to the Alone in the Dark kind of reboot slash remake, even though I don't think right now had nothing to do with that one. But yeah.
Yeah, it was technically a reboot because it did have Edward Carnby, and
Yep.
technically it was the Edward Carnby from the original like period
Yeah.
piece. Even though he now swears like a sailor, I don't know where that happened, but he looks completely different. But one game that reminds me that Too Dark kind of reminds me of it that I really liked. I want to play more of it. It was Darkwood. Did you ever play Darkwood?
Yeah, Darkwood is
Yeah,
much
that has
better
a
game.
really very sinister atmosphere, and just the kind of the mystery aspect of it. Just like it really creeps you out, and it really uses light and darkness in an interesting way.
Yeah, but that is absolutely a much better game than Too Dark. But perhaps it doesn't do as many interesting things with its themes as Too Dark does. Perhaps. I mean,
Okay.
it's been
Yeah,
it's
that's
been a
fair
few
enough.
years, but I remember being extremely like, whoa, they're going there. So yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, I've said in the past that a lot of my favorite games are 7 out of 10s. Like, what my favorite games tend to be ones that try really interesting and unique and ambitious things that don't necessarily succeed on everything, but don't just play it safe. Like, there's a million games that play like Call of Duty and Halo and even Last of Us and stuff like that, and the recent God of War games, they're very impressive visually. I haven't even played the new Spider-Man games. They look really great, but I've played that game before, But something like Darkwood, or I'm assuming Too Dark and things like that, it's like, wow, this is something that I've never seen before or since, and I really want to see this improved and developed on. Those tend to hold my attention much longer than something that's like, okay, we've tried game mechanic, copyright, ATM, trademarked mechanic A, B, C, and D. We've tried this for 50 games. Everybody loves them. Let's make a game with all these things and make great graphics and great voice acting and okay story, I guess. And yeah, let's ship 10 million copies. And it's like, that's great. I've played that though. I've already played that.
yeah, that's my issue, of course, with AAA games. That there's only so much interest that I can get from something that I've played again and again before. I mean, there's only so much that you can convince me with. Oh, latest graphics, incredible soundtrack, and I mean, just to make an example, I mean, we've seen like photorealistic graphics has been like a marketing term for like I don't know, well, what year is it again? But like 35 years maybe.
Oh
So
yeah, absolutely. Even back in the day, like, they were saying that back in the early 90s and mid
yeah,
90s, like, super realistic graphics and everything. I remember, I think Blade Runner, the adventure game, talked about how, it looks just like the movie, things like that. It's kind of
yes.
funny to go back to it now, but I think it has a very interesting look, but it doesn't look like the movie. Um, yeah, I know it is tiring, and it's also and just like the whole going back to the whole Morrowind to Oblivion to Skyrim thing. It's I remember even having this. I love Morrowind, but even playing Morrowind, I'm like, oh wow, this is so cool. This is like Daggerfall and full 3D and everything like that. And I try to do one thing, I'm like, oh, I can't do that in this game. Oh, all right. Well, then I was like, oh, there are no horses in this game. Oh, okay. It's like, oh, this is the entirety of the map. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's great, but it's just like every single time that like there was something that you had in a previous experience that isn't here now, you just feel a little tinge of disappointment. I feel that so much with a lot of 3D game or a lot of AAA games now because as great as the presentation is, you still have, say Spider-Man, for example, or GTA 5 or whatever. You have this gigantic, beautifully rendered city that is filled with just they're basically might as well just be cardboard boxes because there's nothing in them. There's no NPCs you can interact with. There's no interiors for 99% of the buildings.
Mm,
And even when you go back to GTA 4, there were more interiors. A lot of the buildings are actually built out and things like that. And that things like in a very crude fashion, I was extremely impressed with things like Shadows of Doubt, where it would proc gen an entire, several city blocks where every single room, vent, and closet and hallway was
incredible.
somebody's house, somebody's apartment. It's all connected by a wire grid. You could actually use the climb through the air ducts to get to different areas, and everybody had a schedule. Everybody had a name. Everybody had a job. Everybody had a relationship or friendships and colleagues and employers and phone numbers. And it's like, wow, this is very an early peek into like what kind of Warren Spector talked about is like the city block game where you have one city block and everything in it is realized, everything is interactive, and everything has choice and consequences. That's kind of the dream is to actually have all that, but we seem to be getting more into the uh kind of shallow presentation side of things where yeah you can fling through the city as Spider-Man and it looks absolutely breathtaking and gorgeous, but that's all you can do. You can punch some guys and press X to do, super combo uh, takedown
Hmm.
animation. It looks incredible. It looks like a movie, but is that it? I can watch Spider-Man 2. I love that movie by Sam Raimi. I like Spider-Man 2. Might as well watch that. It's about as much interactivity as pressing X to take down, dude. And there's more to it. I'm being very facetious, but yeah, there should be. I think people have focused on the wrong things. People are focused on stuff that you can show in a trailer. I think Racevic did that a great video about that. He said there was a video he did called "You Can't Put Gameplay on the Box,"
Mm,
which basically is like talking about how the aspects of games that you cannot show, you can't like say like incredible controls and gameplay on the back of a box. It'd be like, well, what? So yeah, I'm not doing his video justice, but he talked about those kind of elements that you can't easily explain that make games great or potentially terrible if they're done poorly. That you can't show in a trailer, you can't put on the back of a box, you can't put in marketing materials because just how would you even say that? So it's an increasing problem, and I noticed that, for example, one of the big things today. I mean, you go back to older games, they're not going to run very well, but newer games, I think they should run at a decent frame rate. We have supercomputers now. We have incredible computers. One reason that these games are going better graphics, 4K, super sharp, shadows and day, all these like crazy graphics features while stuttering, barely running at 30 frames per second is because a lot of these trailers are going to be at 30 frames per second. They don't care about how the game performs or controls. They only care about how good it looks in the trailer.
yep. Yeah, again, I completely agree that people seem to focus on the wrong things, which again, you mentioned there, 30 versus 60 FPS, but I mentioned length before, and again, people getting mad at how short a game is. Nobody seems to get mad at how long a game is, I've never seen anyone complain. Oh, no, maybe there's someone, but, you never get a discourse of people saying, oh, no, 80 hours, are you crazy? You're not going to play 80 hours. I've never seen that kind of discourse. I've only seen discourse saying, "Oh no, 8 hours? Are you crazy? That's still short for my $60 or whatever." Which, again, as one is getting older, I think everyone prefers shorter, more thoughtful, more meaningful experiences rather than wasting 80 hours just exploring and having to do all sorts of weird side quests that don't really mean anything, and crafting and picking up items and collectathons, blah blah blah. We could go on. So yeah, but that's something I really don't understand, and I can't really, I mean, I understand it, of course, if you have like limited resources and you want to play as much as possible, then perhaps you might want, that kind of good ratio for your bucks, that kind of time versus money ratio. But with all the free stuff that's out today, all the free games that you get to play today, I don't know. Don't even justify that kind of discussion of time versus time slash money ratio. But okay. But speaking of favorite games, I have something that I wrote down because I looked at your favorite games podcast. And I found a title which surprised me a bit, which is, let's see if you guess which one it is.
I think I might have an idea. I don't necessarily hold that as my favorite, one of my favorites, but I have a special. Yeah. All right, let's hear it.
I didn't click on the discussion that you made about it because I wanted to kind of go first impression. Time Commando.
Yep.
That's the one. So full disclosure from me, I had Time Commando when I was young. Okay, not really a kid, young, and I bought. It was one of the few games that I managed to buy with my own money. So no pirated copies. I actually owned a real copy of Time Commando, which has long since disappeared. And I thought it was fine. I thought it was. I mean, it was interesting to play. It was like, what's next? What's gonna happen next? It was that a really kind of, I don't know. I call it the French touch. I don't know why, but that really that kind of French game thing that you couldn't wait to see what was next because there were a lot of surprises and strange things. A bit like the terrible Cryo games, Dreams to Reality. I hope no one has played it. It's kind of awful, but yeah, okay. So I have good memories about it, but yeah. So it is interesting to see, why did you put Time Commando on your favorite games list?
Explain yourself.
Yes, explain yourself.
Yeah, it like if you stripped away all of the theme of the game, like if it was just the core mechanics of the game, I would say it is the most. It's basically a crude fixed camera final fight. That's all it is. You punch, you kick, you can pick up items, you can pick up ranged items and things like that. It's like, if you really want to boil it down, all it is fixed camera, 3D final fight, right? but the idea, the scope of the world and there's very little story, but the scope of the adventure, you get to punch saber-toothed tigers in the face. You get to stab Roman generals with their own sword. You get to shoot World War One soldiers with era equivalent rifles, and you get to zap space people with lasers, all in the same on the span of a couple hours. Like that, the whole scope of the game. We go from prehistoric through. I think you go to like you go prehistoric, then you go into like ancient Greece and Rome and then medieval, and then eventually you get into, I'm skipping like there's like a conquistador,
Yeah.
then you get into like cowboy, and then modern, early modern, like World War One, World War Two, then modern, future war, then in like the space. And there's so much like super interesting, almost there's almost no story to the game, but there's a ton of environmental storytelling.
Mm.
Like everything that you see in the game, it's almost all show don't tell. Like you're like, oh, who is this? Is this like a an Incan king, or what is this, a sacrifice? What's going on here? It's like, is this an English lord or something like that, or like, especially when I think the modern times is like, it's really interesting because you see like the trenches in World War One, then you go into like late modern, which then you start to see equipment and wars that have not been fought yet, and you're like,
Mm.
what's happening here? Which nation is this? Who are you fighting against? And then he goes into the future, far future, is like, what happened? How did we get to this era? So from that aspect, the theme really elevates the game from like a 5 to like a 7 in my. But again, some of my favorite games are sevens. um but yeah, from the gameplay perspective, from a technological perspective, it's actually very interesting because it's basically playing a movie file.
Yep.
Like every step forward, it's almost like an animated version of a fixed camera, like Resident Evil style game, where every step forward will just play further of a pre-rendered background and move the camera, characters respectively. It's really cool how they did it. I think a couple other games that have done that technique as well. I think like some of the old Sega CD FMV games had like a pre-rendered animated game, and you'd have like ships moving around and stuff like sewer. I keep on thinking like sewer shark or whatever, but I don't know, for some reason. Yeah, that was Adeline Software. I want to do an Adeline Delphine retrospective because they made some of my favorite games. Like I love Flashback and stuff like that. But and obviously like the French adventure games, like I think, didn't they do the Little Big Adventure and things like that? I think that was them as well. Um, yeah, Time Command is on a great game, but I love the scope of it. The idea that you could just be transported into various different eras and use their own weaponry against them and things like that. It just kind of reminded me of like an action-based Quantum Leap or Sliders or something like that, where you just go into this area and then, oh, all of a sudden I've got to punch a conquistador in the face and take his musket or things like that. So I just like the scope of the game is what really makes it interesting. And there's a constant, the variety is just there's so much variety in the game too. You're like constantly switching out weapons, constantly switching out enemies. This guy has a big flail. You have to like dodge his flail moves and then pick up a shield and a sword and start fighting him. Oh, all of a sudden there's cowboys. I got to throw dynamite at these cowboys now and things like that. So just a lot of variety, a lot of scale, a lot of scope, and some of the environmental storytelling. Again, almost no dialogue in the game at all, but like the future war stuff, you're just like, what's going on? Like, why are we fighting right outside of the U.S. Capitol or whatever it is? Just kind of interesting stuff like that.
It actually, that idea reminds me of, actually, I was searching for them, a couple of late 80s, very early 90s Commodore 64 games. And there's one which basically, if you like what you were describing, sounds almost like a that Thai Commando is a remake of this game. Is called Time Fighter from
Oh,
1988, which is basically the same exact idea, but it's like a side-scrolling 2D, obviously simple thing. In that, so you start from the from your like Jurassic Age, so you're like fighting with rocks at the start. So your only thing is just you have to kill everyone and get to the end of the stage. Again, no story,
yeah,
obviously, very simple stuff. But then you progress and you start using swords, you start using grenades later, and you start, of course, there's not a lot of variety in the gameplay. Obviously, I would say none. But I love that as a kid. So I actually like Ten Commandments because it's basically like the same idea as Time Fighter, which is from 1988, but done in a much more interesting, at least, way. And actually, I got reminded of another one, which is Time Machine, which is another very weird game that again
Was that
Commodore.
by the H.G. Wells, inspired by H.G. Wells or whatever?
I
Or
don't
no?
think so. I think it was more Back to the Future in that the character that you move around looks like Doc Brown, basically.
Oh,
Crazy
cool.
white hair and glasses and white coat. And you go around, and I think I only saw like I don't know if there's more levels, but you basically just go around this like primitive age. Like you have to, I think you have to save dinosaurs or something. I never understood what you have to do in the game, which is a classic when you did not have any instructions or they were very poorly translated back in the pirated piracy's legal era in Italy. And but yeah, it was very interesting. So there were a lot of strange like time traveling games back in on the Commodore 64. I don't know why. I don't think none of these were from France. So interesting, but yeah, it definitely was a thing that they love to do. Um,
Yeah, that kind of makes me want to make a history of time travel games now because I mean, some of them I remember playing the Back to the Future games in the NES and things like that, and they were just always
oh
very kind of dull. I
yeah.
did nothing with the premise. It was just you know poor man's Mario again. It wasn't
Hmm.
all that exciting, but I like it when you can just kind of like shift through eras and stuff. I like any game that has like a long time scope. Like I've always been attracted to that. Anything from Age of Empires to a lesser degree, but more to like Empire Earth. Like the selling
Mm.
point in that game was fantastic.
Yep.
You start in the Stone Age, and then you can get mechs. Like in one long real time strategy session, you can go from throwing rocks to shooting nukes. That's a great premise. Uh, I remember like there's an old Flash game, I think War of Ages or something like that. I forget what it was called, but it was a similar like it's a side scroller, almost like a side scroller. I don't even know what game to kind of compare it to, but you basically have two ends and guys meet at the middle and fight. Almost
Mm.
very very simple, but you can start out again like early Stone Age, then build up through the ages. You can get arrows, and then eventually you can get guns and stuff like that. And it's like essentially there's neighbors who are fighting through thousands of years, right? But I always just like that kind of progression and the scope throughout the ages and upgrading equipment, things like that.
Yeah, and well, if you ever get to make that video, one other game that I was about to talk about it, then I said, okay, let's stop. But since we're just talking about it, 1983 again, Commodore 64. Yeah, that's what I grew up with, of course. Dino Eggs, which is
Dino
Dino Eggs. So
Dino
it's
eggs. Okay.
yeah, it's basically like classic, arcade style, single screen, like Donkey Kong style arcade game. Uh, but the premise is lovely in that you're a time traveler who, for some reason, went back to the Stone Age, the Jurassic Age, whatever, and for by mistake cracked a dinosaur egg, and that somehow caused the end of the world. so now you're
Okay.
so now you're going back in time, trying to undo what you did, but you don't know which egg it is. So you're basically just collecting all the dinosaur eggs that you find, and I don't know why he's doing with them. So I don't know where comes the I'm solving this part because I would think that would make things worse rather than better. But okay, so now yes,
Making a very big omelet. A very big omelet. Yeah.
I think yes, and it's very unique in that the idea is simple in that you uncover this like little stone thing, and if you find eggs, you collect the eggs. You can just get three at a time, and then you go to your time machine and go away, and then you come back and you redo again until all the eggs are picked up, or you just get bored and you leave the level. It's actually one of those very weird early arcade when you can just
Oh wow.
say,
Yeah. Very experimental.
yeah, you
Yeah.
can just say, okay, this level is boring. I'm not just gonna quit and not do anything. I mean, the game penalizes you for that, but there's no game over, so you can do that as to your art content. And there's a lots of other interesting stuff. I won't go too much about it because yeah. But one of the two things I loved. One was the big Mama Dino attack, which basically is this huge uh, foot of Mama dinosaur, which comes out from the from the
It's like
top screen.
Godzilla. Like
Yes, and got splat. And of course, if you're under that, that's not funny. But yeah, it's great. It's great to see this huge sprite, which we would not see in 1983 on the Commodore 64, coming down, and of course everything like slows down to a crawl because yeah, he
Yeah,
has to
yeah.
render this huge sprite. And so that was fun. And another thing, and that almost makes me think of Dino Eggs as a horror game, is that there's spiders in the game, and there's these huge, like Jurassic spiders. I don't know what you want to call them. And if you get bit by a spider, you don't die, but you start losing health points. And if you get back to your time machine, that's fine. You get them back, and nothing happens. But if those health points go to zero, you don't die, but you get into a kind of horrible transformation that turns you into like a human spider. And
Oh wow. Oh
as a
weird.
kid, that as a child rather, that freaked me out to no end. I was like 4 years old. I was like, ah. So
Like
yeah,
body snatchers kind of. Yeah.
it's yeah,
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's such a weird premise, but I love the just the creativity of games of that era where they're just like nobody said no. They're just like, oh, let's just try about collecting dynamics. The spider, why could you turn into a spider? Maybe, I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah, that was a very unique time in gaming where you can make like the one game that I always talk about, the kind of the original bomb simulator from 1985, From Rugs to Riches, where you're just a
Hmm.
bum going around on the street collecting money, or you can get empty bottles that you can collect for swap for cash, and you have to get an education, and you have to cut your hair to get a job, so you can climb the ladder, climb the social ladder, and get from a homo, not a homo, sorry, from a hobo, oops, to decent living wages, so to speak. So become like a white collar, and so imagine doing that 1985 with 64K of memory, having like an actual city
Wow.
that you can explore in
Yeah.
kind of 2D side scrolling. It's like whoa. What?
No, it's super interesting. I've been playing. If you ever tried out the Playdate, the little portable console,
Hmm.
I don't know if it's released over where you are, but it's kind of like an indie thing. It's kind of overpriced to be honest, but it's kind of cool. It's like the size of a tiny little Game Boy, and it's got two buttons,
And
a
the crank.
D-pad, and a crank. Yeah, and all the games made for it are custom built for that, and it's specifically. I want to say it's one color. Maybe it's I think it's just black and white, and it's like not even a backlit screen. It's like very like almost insufferably retro. It's like original Game Boy. It's a lot more advanced than a Game Boy, but it looks just like the original Game Boy in terms of like it's black on gray, and it has a
Hmm.
highly reflective back screen. So if you get good lighting, it's actually got a lot of contrast. But some of the games in there just remind me of just like how cool and creative games can be when you're heavily limited by technology.
Yep.
So just some of the concepts they have in those titles, and they have like a program where you buy the console, you activate it, and you get two new games a week. They just get like brought into your inbox, and you just like open them up like little presents, and you get two new games or whatever.
Hmm.
Just some of those concepts of those games, just like wow, this is so cool. When you're not thinking about releasing this to 10 million sales, and Unreal Engine 5, you can come up with some really out of the box ideas and concepts. You have two buttons and a crank. What can you do with that? You can do physics games. You can do sort of weird, like there's like a time manipulation game where if you crank forward you go forward in time, if you crank backward you go backward in time. All sorts of really interesting ideas like that. So it just reminds me of the kind of early game design where there were no rules, they just tried stuff out.
Yeah, those were good times. But as a closing note, I think we can definitely all agree that all the best games are a seven, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's some games that I acknowledge that are like truly great games but I just find myself attracted to the original stuff, and just you're probably in the same way. Like I didn't start with the Commodore. Obviously, Commodore was bigger in the UK or in Europe than it was over in the States.
Yeah.
The earliest console I had NES, I had the Atari, and I had the 10D color computer, which was like
Mm.
very yeah. I would say it's probably a little bit better than the Commodore 64, but not
Mm-hmm.
not 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 as obviously not nearly as good as the Amiga. But I like had Pitfall and RoboCop and some other games on there, and that to put it in perspective, to save your, it was mostly like a programming machine, and to be able to save code, you had to record onto I think a VHS tape, and that took forever, and it never worked.
Classic.
But that very with that said, I think we both have like a long history of games, and you start to kind of see patterns, and then once you see the same kind of pattern appear again and again, you just kind of get less interested in it, even if it's very well executed. Like if somebody said, "Oh, recommend me a great third-person action game that has a lot of pizzazz and style and compelling story and great visuals," like, "Oh yeah, well, God of War reboots are probably great." I just not really my bag right now. It's not really my thing because I've played those games before, basically.
Hmm. Yeah, and again, it all goes back to the whole, how many risks you can actually take while making this game. Because again, all the games that get the best ratings are all kind of safe bets, all like evolving on the mechanisms that are being repeated again and again, all gaming mechanisms that are just well oiled, safe, so to speak. So it would be very strange that a game that is gonna sell millions of copies would try something very different from those mechanics. Of course, if you Hideo Kojima, you might have the kind of power to do something completely strange and completely different, which of course doesn't mean it automatically interesting, but because I for one, was never a huge fan of his games, but yeah, of course. But still, yeah, if you wanna if you want to release a game to a wide, I would say the wider the market, the safer the game probably has to be. I mean, that's just how it is, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I mean, the idea, the ultimate product is that something that can appeal to everybody, like the iPhone, for example. Anybody can use an iPhone. That's a great, successful product, right? With art, I think you run the risk of trying to appeal to everybody, but fail, appealing to nobody in the end. Like I feel that happens with a lot of niche games where you have this, and it really betrays the original audience, where you have this core audience who loves this particular idea, this particular concept, and they get a lot of success, like a good amount of success, and a very dedicated audience. And then the executives or whomever, the publishers say, "Okay, let's do this, but let's change this and this so that because those are the sticking points that made some people not want to try the game out." And changing those things all of a sudden changes the experience. And so the core audience is like, "Wait a second, we like that. We like that. The game not only kills you regularly, tells you that you need to get better, and also makes the game harder every time you die." In terms of like Demon Souls, for example, right? And like we like that aspect. And so the Dark Souls games have been pretty consistently good, but there's a lot of people who really want to make that change that now, like easy mode and like you know instant respawn or whatever, and that would just change the dynamic of the game completely and probably alienate the original audience that made it successful in the first place. And I tend to cover those kind of series a lot because it's just like Diablo, just like Fallout, just like Elder Scrolls and these other titles, and they start out and the core audience loves them. And could they be improved? Absolutely, but when you change so much about it, you're to appeal to a wider audience, you alienate the original audience that loved the original concept, and that's always just a frustration. Monetarily, it quite often works out, but it's a it no longer becomes like it's no longer like a cohesive vision, and that's the kind of frustrating thing I find about that. But another thing I also noticed is just like when you talk about reviews and stuff, the disconnect between reviews and sales is just dramatic nowadays. You ever notice
Hmm.
that? Where it used to be the game that got the 10 out of 10 was the best selling game of the year. Like you go back to, Zelda Ocarina of Time. That game got, 10 out of 10s and 9s out of 10s and everything like that. And that game
Mm-hmm.
sold great, considering it was on the N64, which wasn't the most successful console at the time. It sold very well. Grand Theft Auto, 4 was like tens, tens, nines, tens. That sold crazy. But nowadays, you notice that some games get rave reviews but don't sell well. It's like it's like reviews themselves have become less relevant than just mass appeal. Great example recently was Pal World. Reviewers were like pretty negative about the game, but it sold incredibly well
Yeah.
out of nowhere too.
Mm-hmm. I think there's two things about this. One thing is that today you don't really, especially if you're someone that has, is following certain developers, certain creators, so to speak. You don't necessarily need a positive review to know, yeah, maybe I'm interested in this, or a negative review to say, oh no, I'm not interested in this. So, of course, reviews have a bit, lost their value over time, obviously, because there's a more of a direct connection between creators, developers, so to speak, and audience. So that,
Yeah.
like in the 90s, was absolutely impossible. Um, but on the other side, there's another thing which is a bit more worrying, I would say. That, as you said, one it used to be that once you got a 10 out of 10 at like IGN, for example, and it would
Yeah.
really move, the sales for you. That would mean really something for a game. You would put that on the box. It would make your game successful if perhaps no one had heard of it before for some reason. It would definitely be meaningful for you as a developer.
Yeah.
Today, is it really that meaningful? But the problem is that people have been shying away from reviewers rather, and going more towards influencers, content creators who don't really review. I mean, some do obviously, but many of them don't really review games, right? They just
Yeah.
try them out, play them a lot if they like them or they're sponsored. They play them a lot. They
Yeah.
yeah, like dissect them and do them again and again, Twitch, whatever. So those people are not, I wouldn't say are really fans of that game in particular, but they're really like fans of that influencer content creator. So that's something that, so they say, so that content creator says the game is good, let's all go buy the game. So that's, it doesn't really matter. Perhaps it got really poor reviews. It doesn't matter. Yeah, Bind Sauce or whatever said that. But all respect to Bind Sauce, I mean, I like Vinny, absolutely. But yeah, Bind Sauce, whoever said the game is good, so let's all go buy it. Who cares? And that is, as an unfortunate, I mean, that's all fine. I mean, I don't really have a lot to say against that, but the problem is that those people buying the game lose that kind of um, critical thing that you would usually get from a review. That's the thing. So uh, reviews can also be useful sometimes. At least I do try to make them useful for the audience,
Yeah.
for you as a fan to understand. Do I like this? Can are maybe other games do this kind of thing that I like better than the one I'm reading about right now? You get that kind of critical analysis, which possibly, hopefully, a review should do.
Right.
That usually you don't get that from a content creator, so that's, I think, has changed. So that's why a review today doesn't really mean that much anymore, because a lot of times people don't have the need for a review. I don't know if you agree.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I agree that there was a time and place where I would look at tons and tons of reviews to figure out if I wanted to get a game, and I would pick apart things and see, I'd trace trends and patterns, like, okay, these people all mentioned this particular thing as a problem. That's probably an issue. I do that today with Amazon reviews. Like, one of the most useful things you can do with Amazon is go onto a product, look at the one stars, and look for patterns. If 20 different people say mention this one aspect of the product, probably is a problem. So reviews used to be really, really yeah. I think that the well has been poisoned, though. I think that the well of reviews have been poisoned because anything from a very fairly shallow game getting, praised to high heaven, to the infamous GameSpot issue where, like, there was a bunch of marketing dollars put into GameSpot, and one reviewer, I think Jeff Gerstmann, reviewed what was that game, Kane and Lynch,
Hmm.
and the publisher wanted to have that review pulled or their advertising budget pulled, and so that was a direct influence of getting him fired. And it was like, oh wow, that so these guys are being paid off, right? And for whatever reason, all these things always leads back to IGN. IGN gets like blamed for everything. IGN is pretty milk toast. IGN's like not the worst at all. They're just very milk toast. Like,
Yeah.
they've had a couple bad apples. They had that one guy who was plagiarizing reviews and things like that. But they're not like the worst at all. They just have very boring and very dry and very generally not that insightful reviews, they're fine. Um, the ones I find much more offensive than the kind of milquetoast reviews from IGN are the ones that they have a personal vendetta in the
Oof.
review. Like a great example of this, like what's the best selling game of 2023? Um,
Oh,
Most people probably wouldn't be able to tell you that it was actually Hogwarts Legacy.
oh yeah,
Hogwarts
sure.
Legacy sold like gangbusters.
Mm-hmm.
It never got a nomination for game of the year. It got some scathing reviews, like 1 out of 10s in some areas, right?
Yep.
Not for the game itself. You could argue the game is like, oh, it's an open world game. It's fine. It's like a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10. Some
Mm-hmm.
people loved it. Some people didn't like it as much. But it's a competent game.
Yeah.
You can't argue that it's not a competent game. It has a lot of gameplay. It has a lot of elements. The combat is pretty decent. It has a big open world. It has good looking graphics. It's a competent game. You may be sick to death of it, that kind of game. It's fine, but at like worst, it's like a 6 to 7 out of 10. But there are people um, giving scathing reviews to it because they disagreed with the original author's personal opinions, who
Yep.
had nothing to do with the game. They just simply licensed that property, right? So from that aspect, like you get this kind of weird. If you do that too many times, do they have that expression in Italy, like the boy who cried wolf?
Mm-hmm.
Where yeah, like I think that reviews have overly praised some games too much and given bad reviews to some games for stupid reasons enough that people don't really give the score much weight anymore. Like the famous Fallout New Vegas thing where it made one point lower on Metascore and they missed out on millions of dollars in bonuses and things like that. Things like that really tick people off. I still talk about that. Whereas what you're saying is like first impressions videos, those are great because they give a real time first impression. Like one of my favorite, the biggest inspiration to me as a content creator was Total Biscuit, and that was his
Mm.
entire format. He did the WTF is series, which is the first impressions. He would boot up a game. Sometimes he'd tweak the settings a little bit before he started, but it was pretty much a raw first impressions for the most part, or maybe like the first few hours of gameplay, and that would be his snippet of, and he would kind of review in real time while playing the game, and that was a very raw and kind of natural reaction to the game. Like, am I actually having fun in this moment? Now that I've played 40 hours of the game, I can look back and draw these comparisons to, oh, this is like Dante's Inferno and the historical importance of this and so, and controls are better done in this game. Sure, that's all fine and good, but I think people like the raw, in the moment reaction that a first impression gives you. And I think that's why that kind of content has risen in popularity. Or, that or the kind of more entertaining reviews, like
Mm.
the 2 hour scripted deep dives or things like that. I think that it's just that it's an evolving format. So I think that people kind of, and some people like watching reviews for games they never want to play.
Yeah,
That's the
absolutely.
weird thing,
I
like
do
that,
that all
where
the
the
time.
review, where the review becomes the content.
Mm.
It's very strange. It's evolving. It's an evolving medium for sure.
Mm-hmm. A lot of times I see people being nostalgic towards gaming magazines that, for the most part, have died out,
Yeah.
obviously. But what you hear them being nostalgic about is not the reviews. So I never hear anyone being nostalgic to the good old time when I had to wait for the monthly issue of whatever magazine to find out if this game was good or not. So no one is missing that, I think, at least. So if I'm wrong, people will correct me, but I'm pretty sure no one's missing that. What they're missing is, kind of the community that would form around the magazine, and if there was, kind of a connection with the writers that you would know and trust, maybe. But that's it. They are not missing the whole. Yeah, a review in this magazine can make or break the sales of this game. I don't think anyone is missing that. And again, I'm not saying this because I miss that as well. I don't miss it at all, honestly. But I do get kind of worried that we're, losing a bit that critical analysis kind of thing. But then again, writing a review on IGN or whatever doesn't necessarily mean that you have the skills to do that kind of critical analysis anyway. So, okay.
No, no, I actually I find if a review, I think the review score actually damages the review. I think that people get too obsessed with the number.
Yeah.
Because what is a 7? What is an 8? What objective value does an 8 have that a 7 does not have? Like, I remember distinctly being kind of, I don't know if I want to buy Super Smash Brothers for the N64 because it got a 7 out of 10 on GameSpot. That's not really good. Even back then, there was a problem. That's how long this problem's been around.
Yeah.
7 out of 10 should be great. 7 out of 10, you're 6 steps better than 1. But for whatever reason, like a Call of Duty game should be like a 5 or 6. And that should be fine. It's a good shooter. It's a solid shooter. It functions, at least should function.
Mm.
But it shouldn't be that anything under than an 8 is awful, and so that probably undermines the value as well. But there's a reason. I think it used to be different. I think a lot of websites before they figured it out, it used to have the review score at the top of the page,
Mm.
and you'd scroll down and see the review.
Yeah.
Now quite often it's at the bottom. And
That's always at the bottom.
Purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's always at the bottom because they want you to have to read the review. When everybody just scrolls down to the bottom, oh, it's an 8, and the minus points are too much water and not enough Pokemon or something like that. And that was a famous review. People want it like just an immediate, oh, I'm mad at this because this is too low and too high. And what's crazy, why are you getting mad at a review? You must already have an idea of how good this game is if you're upset at a review.
Yeah.
The idea that you're upset because somebody else has a different score, made up magical number to review this game. That's why I find I don't always agree with him, but he's mostly makes good content. I think Skill Up does. His reviews are I highly recommend or I do not recommend in his video title. It's not clickbait. It's just like, oh, interesting. So you can actually just take that as face value or watch his 20-minute review and get a more nuanced take on it. Same thing with some articles, and I think that a couple magazines and online on websites do like the thumbs up or thumbs down, which I think is probably better than a number score, but still is pretty simplistic. Mm-hmm. Like recommendation or not recommendation, I think that's fine. But I think that putting too much emphasis on that and Metacritic and all that is done, I think, damage to the field of critique because everything just gets crunched down into numeric values and it's like, oh, this is mathematically we've determined this is an 86 or this is a 92 whatever. It's just kind of silly. It doesn't really give you much to work off of.
Yeah, that's why even when I review even the games that I personally don't like, so I should be our review is still subjective, so I should just put a negative score or at least say I don't recommend this at all. But the thing is, I find those kind of reviews not useful for the audience. So I do try to avoid that as much as possible. There are still games that I had to write that because I really did not have anything to recommend. But there were really rare cases. Even if I don't like a game, I try to go out of my mind, so to speak, so astral projection, and think, but who could possibly like this? Perhaps fans of this other game or fans of this genre. Why not? Even if I personally don't vibe with it, doesn't mean that other people will share my opinion or they might like it. So I always try to find something positive that I can still recommend to people, even if my review is overall negative. I always try to find something because, again, it's also about respecting people's time, right? It's also respecting their work. In that nobody, as I always say, nobody sets out to make a bad game when they start developing something. Okay, there are a couple cases, but
maybe the day before might be the exception. But
the day before, yeah. But generally, no one wants to make a bad game, right? They want to make something decent. So if something happens along the way that this turns out to be a bad game, you can't really blame them for that. That's probably something that went wrong, something of development, production. They were not good enough with the tools that they had, whatever. So you want to still respect their time and still say, maybe someone out there could still like this game, perhaps. So, and I always think about like a recent indie adventure game that had a lot of problems. That, the voice acting was kind of awful and some actual puzzles did not work. And the ending, at least when I played it back in the day, was broken, so I couldn't access the ending. I was just stuck forever, and the developer had to send me the ending via email, a video. So
oh, that's funny.
Yes, so you couldn't really recommend a game like that. I mean, just from a technical
No.
standpoint. But I still liked some things about that game. So I said, if you can forgive those shortcomings, which yeah, were a lot of were actually long
Yeah.
comings. uh, but if you can get behind those, or maybe if the developer can fix them, other things, but okay, uh, you might still like this. You might still get something good out of it because it's still an indie project, so it's still a small developer. Like maybe two people worked on it, so you want to still respect their time and maybe find a possible audience. So, but not everyone does that. That's the thing.
Yeah, a lot of people don't put any nuance in the reviews. They already have a set opinion, or they can only see things through their narrow scope. And I think that's why, especially for somebody who can afford it, like IGN or GameSpot, or not so much anymore because they're probably, I think they're struggling. Have you seen their video content recently? It looks like worse than TikTok. But they used to have some of the best video reviews in the industry.
Mm.
But not everybody should review every game. Like, for example, me, I shouldn't be put within 10 miles of a FIFA review or a NFL review or whatever.
Me
I
too.
I don't really enjoy those sports. I don't really enjoy those games. And last time I played a football game was NFL Blitz or something, and it was fine, I guess. But like, I wouldn't know what the current industry standard is for that type of game, how well it emulates the feel and excitement of a real football match, for example. Any of that kind of stuff. I'm a casual racing game enjoyer, but I wouldn't necessarily be the best person to review the F1 game. I don't watch F1. I don't really play F1 games, so I don't know what if it was worse than last year's or whatever. But you get these a lot of cases actually where you have somebody who doesn't even like that type of game reviewing that game, and that's just
Yep.
such an error. Like you don't have to have these people reviewing all their games. Like, have them focus on their genre, and that's even better because one great way of it just, I think we're in a conversation we had earlier where the you start to see what's great about YouTube is you and other platforms is you start to see somebody who has a similar opinion about things that you like.
Mm-hmm.
Like, imagine if you had a friend and he recommends a restaurant and you're like, okay, I guess I'll try it out. You really like the food there. He recommends another restaurant, you like the food there too. Eventually, you're going to follow every single recommendation for restaurant he's going to say because he's been really very close to your likes and dislikes up to this point. Same thing with video reviews. You try to find people who you kind of gravitate to. Like I watch ACG, Skill Up, Force Gaming, a few others, but and for the most part, and I agree with generally like about 90% of their recommendations and likes and dislikes. But sometimes they disagree. Sometimes I actually had one on my front page. I had God, what was it? It was one of the West games, like Evil West or something like that. One
Mm.
guy's like, I highly recommend Evil West, and the other one was like, I did not enjoy Evil West at all. I was like, whoa, this is interesting. I want to watch both these and see what I can kind of conclude with. But people will have their likes and dislikes, and not everybody's gonna like every game. So maybe have, just like they have in traditional newspapers, like the sports commentator section, and the politics or news or whatever. Have a different. This is the strategy guy. This is the life simulator gal. This is the guy who likes shooters. A guy who likes competitive shooters.
Yeah.
If you get somebody who's doing competitive shooter stuff, like high end you know, Counter Strike or Call of Duty or Warzone or something like that, they're going to look for something different than somebody like you or me, because we're not thinking about all the different exploits and movement bugs and things like that you can do
Absolutely.
at the high end for competitive shooting. We want to play, Doom 2016 or Titanfall or whatever you want to play, right? Which may be like a single player campaign or multiplayer without all that kind of stuff, with more like grounded, less esportsy kind of appeal. So yeah, I think there's room for that, and I think you should definitely kind of choose your reviewers as much as you choose the games to review, because you or I are not going to be the people who are going to be best to review the latest Fortnite season, for example.
Obviously not. Yes. And again, for example, I don't really have like a favorite genre. I mean, a lot of people like sometimes ask, "Oh, what's your favorite genre?" But I don't know. I like anything that has a good story, for example. So if it's got a good story, get me to play anything. For example, there was a strategy game about football. Speaking about football, that had kind of an interesting story throughout. So I
Oh,
even played that because why not? If it's got a story, I can definitely even be interested, even if the subject matter or the overall mechanics are not really my thing. But yeah, obviously, if it hasn't got a story, if it's especially if it's got a multiplayer component, I'm like, okay, I'm not the right person to to do this at all. So that you so that's what you want to do. Yeah, you want to get people to the right people to review the right stuff. That's really what you want to do.
yeah, and I think we're probably more broad than a lot of people. Some people like shooters, or some people just like the strategy, or they just want to do business sim or whatever. And I think that you and I probably have a pretty wide selection of likes and games we like are attracted to. Like I like RPGs, I like shooters, I like strategy, I like turn-based strategy, I like
Yep.
I played a lot of racing games and things like that. I've played stealth games, I've played all sorts of stuff, adventure games, things like that. So I have a pretty wide selection, but I'm not really that into sports games, for example. I'm not really so much into mundane simulators like Farming Simulator. It's fine, probably, or Euro Truck Simulator is probably
Mm.
surprisingly, interesting, I guess. But I could probably play that and give rough impressions, but it's not really my thing. And there's some people who will buy every single new Euro Train Simulator, or every single new farming simulator or something like that, and they would be the people that would be able to give you a more nuanced opinion. It's like, oh, you know what, this one isn't as good as last year, and this is why. That's really valuable info that I would not have. So yeah, it's but you don't have to be a master of everything.
No.
You don't have to be like everything to give a quality review of something. And you can also, it takes a bit of introspective and insight and understanding your own limitations or your own biases to be able to say, I don't particularly like this game, but I can see it does this, and this really well. So if I found those particular aspects attractive and interesting, which I know a lot of people do, this is how it works, and this is how you do it well, and this is probably fun if you enjoy that. I don't personally enjoy that though. Like that's probably the best you could do.
Mm. Yeah. Not to mention trying to remain objective when for example, for me, there's a few cases where I actually know the developer of this one
Yeah.
game personally. Like, I mean, it's not a friend. They are not a friend, but I know them, and you don't really like what they say, their opinions. So you have to, you look at the game as objectively as possible because, for example, it might not have anything of their opinions, of their politics or whatever. So that's the biggest challenge. You have to try to remain as much as possible objective while trying to write a subjective review. So yeah.
Yeah, it can be also hard if you like talk to the bit devs or whatever, or they're really nice, and you're like, oh man, I really don't want to trash the game
Oof.
now, and it becomes a whole thing, and that's why, yeah, I mean, I don't really do reviews as per se anymore. I basically just do retrospectives and documentaries and opinion pieces now. I don't really want to give. I don't really want to get into the whole review space as well. Like I give impressions and I give my thoughts, but I don't like put a score or like an official stamp of approval or
Mm-hmm.
disapproval anymore because partially because of that, because it's kind of stressful to like, work with PR agencies and developers and stuff like that. And sometimes I talk to them, they're really cool people, but
Yep.
then that kind of might color my like, oh, I don't want to be too harsh about this because I know it's a team of
Mm,
5 people and they worked really hard and whatever.
yeah.
Like I felt really bad one time I streamed a game and I missed one part of the tutorial, and so I struggled to get through the game. I got pretty far in the game despite it, but I missed one part where you can hold a button down and stand in place while aiming your bow, and I'm like, that'd be a really useful thing to do. Um, and later on, they texted me over Twitter saying, "Hey, did you know that you can actually press that?" I'm like, oh, I feel really stupid, but I really like your game. Or I corrected the pronunciation of Wallachia, I think the Transylvania or something like that. And they're like, actually, we did a bunch of research on all this. Like, okay, but it's a there's bad, good and bad about just like yelling into the void where you just like speak your raw opinions without any consequence or any sort of thought to it. But then that you can get over analytical. It's like, oh, I actually know the people who designed this game, and so I want to be nice to them and constructive. And there's a happy medium there, but at some point you do have to kind of be honest. You can't censor yourself, over censor yourself, because what's the worst thing that could happen if you designed a bad game is to get no critical feedback. You'll
Yeah,
never know how to get better, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. That's also something that I also try to do. Trying to be to analyze the mechanics and say, maybe you could have done this better if you did this. Of course, that's just my opinion, and I'm not a game designer, obviously. But as someone that has played a lot of games, I know more or less how I could like something better if it was done differently. So I try to be again useful. I always try to be useful even when I'm criticizing, and that's difficult to do, of course, but that's something that you should, I think, always strive for if you're reviewing something. That also be useful to your reader or viewer or whatever. Speaking of viewer, and as a final note, do you want to share with me anything that you're working on that might publish soonish?
Oh God, not soonish. I had a couple ideas for some games to cover, but they're not in a state where it would either get dated really fast or I wouldn't have the best opinion of them. But there are a couple of games that I wanted to cover as sort of like a, hey, if you're still waiting for the Elder Scrolls, here's some other games that are kind of doing that style. And there are a
Hmm.
couple of really exciting games like that, but they're not really anything kind of released or mature yet. But yeah, probably the next big thing would be the finale to my Cyberpunk documentary. But
Hmm.
that's like, um, I spent about 3 years on that, and this would be the biggest part yet. So it'll be a lot of work, but that'll be essentially the cap of the Cyberpunk documentary series, which goes over from the '60s all the way to the 2020s, kind of the scope of cyberpunk media, both movies, games, books, and comics and shows and everything. That's probably my next big one, but I might do some other work in the in between, depending on how it goes. But that's probably my next big one, and last one I took over a year, so that's a lot of work cut out for me.
Yeah, well, yeah, looking forward to it because I'm still waiting on watching the whole documentary. So perhaps if you publish the, if when you publish the final part, I will gladly go back and watch it all because yes, it's definitely a topic that you're very good at covering. So yeah, it's very
Oh,
interesting.
thank you. Yeah. I still got comments about asking for part four, and sometimes people will find my series and watch all three parts, and it's like, oh wow, where's part four? It's like, unlike you, I can't make three of these videos in a day, just but you can watch them all in a day. I definitely empathize with like directors who do this crazy popular movie or trilogy or whatever, and then people nag about them like make another one, make another one, make
When's
another
the
one.
next one
It's like
coming
you
out?
don't, yeah. Why is it now today? I just saw it in theaters. When's the next one? Or books as well.